Call the Broken Arrow City Council meeting to order. We have an invocation by Pastor Scott Moore.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Pretty good. Heavenly Father, we come before you tonight, and first of all, we're just thankful to be here. We are also thankful that you make all things new. You have been with us this past year, and we have had good times and hard things happen. And that each one of those things remind us how much we need you and rely on your presence every day. It's also important that we come here tonight to remember that we're not to rest on what we did yesterday. In Isaiah, you tell us to forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up, and you do not perceive it. I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. You are a God of new things. And so we pray for your leading as we step into this new year as a city. We ask that you would guide our decisions, that you would turn our hearts to deeply desire you above all else. We ask that you would open doors that need to be opened and close the ones that need to be shut. We ask that you would help us to release our grip on things which you have said no to and hold on to the things that you have called us to pursue. We ask for your wisdom, strength, and power to be constantly present within us. We pray that you would make us strong and courageous for the roads ahead. Give us the ability beyond what we feel we are able to do. Let your gifts flow freely through us so that you will be glorified. We pray for your protection over our families and our friends and our city. We ask for your hand to cover us and keep us from distraction of the enemy's evil intents. We ask that you would create a barrier to surround us and protect us as we seek to do your will. Father, we again just pray for discernment. We pray for leading for all the people that have given of their lives to lead our city. Some without pay, and some probably could make money in other places, but they choose to live here. They choose to lead us in the best way possible. Guide everything that's done and said tonight. We pray for your glory. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Roll call.
Ford,
Here?
Moody,
Here.
Parks,
Here.
Gillespie,
Here.
Wimpy.
Here. Please stand with me and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Attention, salute, pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any items from the consent agenda that need to be removed?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call. Motion passes. Item 7 is public hearings, appeals, presentations, recognitions, and awards. 7A, presentation and update regarding the first annual community services expo.
Good evening. I actually have a couple handouts. You just pass that down for me. So I'm excited to just give you guys a quick update tonight about this event that is changing a little bit. So as you all know, the city has hosted the HOA workshop for several years at Stony Creek. And the past few years after each event, we've just come back and discussed strengths and weaknesses of the format and talked about the potential to take further advantage of the opportunity to use the event as a transparency tool. So we all love it. We think it's great, but we all definitely saw room for improvement. So we started talking about that. We looked around for ideas from other communities, but didn't really find anything that was equal to what we were imagining. So we just started brainstorming what we wanted to see, how we could expand and make it more worthwhile for a larger population of the citizens. So I think that a lot of people just thought it was for HOAs. And so we saw HOA representatives, but not a lot of citizens. And it's rare to have all of our department directors and city leaders all in one place at one time. And so we just really wanted to take advantage of that and make it easy and attractive for the citizens to also take advantage of that. So what we came up with is what will now be known as the Community Services Expo, and this will take the place of what was formerly the HOA workshop. The concept is similar to many expos or conferences that you've attended in the past. There will be a selection of vendor booths, which will be just basically our different city department tables, which we've done in the past. However, this time we'll be setting up the tables in the entryway and in the hallways of Stony Creek rather than in the big meeting area. And the citizens will be able to stop by like they have in the past, any department table of interest, get information and ask questions. We'll be handing out swag bags at registration, and the various tables will have their own handouts or other things that people can take away at that time. So the biggest change this year will be the addition of breakout sessions. So we'll be using the 3 separate big, large meeting rooms to hold approximately 20 breakout sessions with a range of city-specific topics led by our department directors. So you'll see on that, this is just a draft. I didn't want to publish it anywhere yet because we're still working on it a little bit, but this just gives you sort of a gist of how it will look. So there will be 3 sessions happening simultaneously at all times. So about every 30 minutes, there will be 3 different sessions happening. And then there are a couple that are going to be offered twice just based on us anticipating that it'll be a popular topic. That's basically what it looks like. The communications team, one of the big things that we talked about was making sure that it was marketed so that people know what to expect. So they will begin marketing the event this week. And I think there might be pictures of it on the billboard as of today. So it's already up and it'll be up until the event. The communications team has a great marketing plan that will include social posts. We also created a Facebook event today, so share that if you can. And they'll be doing their typical press release and all of those things. So that's about it. Looking forward to it and hoping that this year will kind of be the start of something that ends up being, I don't know, I think it's really cool. It hasn't been done anywhere else, but I feel like it's really worthwhile. So.
You guys have done a really great job over the last few years. And I know this event has gone on for years, and like what, 10, 20, 12?
Quite
I
some
don't know,
time.
quite some time. But because of the name, I think it was limited. I think people thought unless you were a part of an HOA or you were a board member of an HOA, that's the only people who were invited, even though we would say it's open to the whole community, but just the name itself was kind of made you think. So this is great because it's such a good opportunity to get all your questions answered. Like anything you have a question about, you can go to one of these sessions or talk to any member of our department. So
Yeah.
it's just a great opportunity.
I will add that we're just going to have the 15 department tables, but we also we won't have the like for-profit businesses or third-party booths like we did in the past, but we will be having Broken Arrow Seniors, Broken Arrow Neighbors, and what was the third one? KBAB will be there. But that's just because the space is limited because we're going to be in the hallways.
Mayor, if I can, I asked Michaela to pass it out to you. Would you please take a look at it? And if there's something you have a suggestion, or if there's a topic that you think that we can move around, and obviously we'll probably have a suggestion box to see if there's something folks would like to talk
Absolutely.
about,
Great
in future. But really, this is in response to many comments from council members as well as the public to try to just continue to build upon the transparency that we try to provide about what's going on in our city.
Yeah, and I love that we're going to have a fentanyl awareness meeting because we held the public meeting and it wasn't widely attended. But with the push for us to just make people aware of what the epidemic that's going on with fentanyl, I think that is great that people, hopefully they will attend that session. So.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
All right. Citizens' opportunity to address council, there is none. And then on item 9A in general council business, 9A is consideration, discussion, and possible action regarding PUD 126-2022 regarding the enclave at Southern Trails. Jill.
Hi, thank you, Mayor and Council and City Manager. The item before you tonight, the case is PUD 126 and BAZ 125 2022. It's an application to rezone 20.49 acres from A1 agricultural to CG commercial general RM residential multifamily, and CM community mixed use with PUD 126, 2022. This is for a proposed commercial multifamily development that's located generally at the southeast corner of Olive and New Orleans Street. In summary, the PUD proposes 3 development areas. Development Area A is 7.02 acres and is proposed to be developed in accordance with CG Commercial General Zoning District standards, with the exception of building heights. With CG zoning, there's no restriction on building heights, so that's been added in as part of the PUD, restricted to 52 feet or 3 stories, and reducing the minimum lot frontage to 100 from the original 200 feet requirement. Development Area B is designated 1.26 acres and proposed to be developed in accordance with the use and standards of CM zoning, with the exception of multifamily residential is not allowed in this development area. And the PUD does propose that the dimensional standards be based on the CG district, which is in common with Development Area A, except for the building heights being 52 feet or 3 stories, and the minimum lot frontage is 100 feet as well. Development Area C is 12.2 acres and is proposed for residential multifamily with a maximum of 4 dwelling units attached unless there's a design that's a row house configuration. And there's a maximum included in here of 145 dwelling units that are proposed in this area. And for a little bit more background information on the property, we've included in your packet the applicants provided the special warranty deed for the property that shows that the detention pond to the south, it outlines the intended use for detention, drainage, and amenity for the owners of the land to the north and to the south. The language of the deed states that no permanent fences, walls, barriers, or obstructions shall be provided along the common boundary between the detention area and the adjoining lands owned by Perkins Development Corporation to the north, unless by mutual agreement. Although the city of Broken Arrow does not enforce private deed restrictions or covenants, staff has taken it into consideration as part of the review of the PUD. And due to the provided agreement, the applicant is proposing that no screening fence be constructed on the southern boundary of the property. And we've included in your packet a summary table that shows the breakdown of the requirements for RM zoning district and then what's requested in the PUD if it is different from the standard requirement. I'd be happy to answer if you have any questions on those afterwards. And this request was originally considered by Planning Commission on September 8th. At this meeting, it was brought to staff's attention that the required sign notifying the public of the meeting was not posted on the property. So as a result, this item was reconsidered by Planning Commission on October 27th. And during that meeting, 10 residents spoke and 41 online forms were submitted in opposition to the item. The online comment from the previous Planning Commission meeting, the online comments were played again just to make sure we had all the comments in the record from the previous hearing as well. The concerns generally included traffic, home values, safety, burden on schools, and appearance of the units. And during this meeting, staff recommended that the PUD and rezoning case be approved, subject to the outlined changes that staff requested be made at the Planning Commission meeting. And the Planning Commission did recommend approval of 3-1 per staff recommendation, with the added condition that a detailed site plan and elevations be brought back to Planning Commission and City Council for approval, and that the development include a mix of 1- and 2-story units. And Planning Commission reserves the right to require up to 100% masonry on any facade within the development. The changes recommended by staff and Planning Commission have been made in the PUD design statement that's in your packet as well. So also would like to note that whenever the site plan and elevations are submitted to the city for review, the city will also send out notifications again to the same property owners that received notifications the first time, so that they're aware of the Planning Commission hearing on the site plan and elevations. Since that time, December 27th, the developer and the applicant held a meeting with surrounding property owners to discuss the proposed development, and approximately 30 residents attended the meeting. And items discussed included the type of housing, the mix of housing styles, the use of masonry material on facades, and the preservation of the conservation easement to the south, screening, traffic, and the number of proposed units. So with that, I know we have the applicant here that would like to speak tonight, but also several members of the public. And I'd be happy to stay and answer any questions that you have.
I have a couple of questions. On the detention, my understanding is that this is the detention for the property that we're talking about. The lake that we're talking about there was built to handle that detention. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
It does
so all
handle
the
the-
engineering and everything's in place for that.
Yes, it is.
Also, it's kind of a piecemeal in trying to figure out everything about this, the PUD, which certainly is definitely a concern of ours. But those things that, if it were to be passed, that would come back to the planning commission and then ultimately the city council. Be sure that we include in that, if it is passed, the facade, finish of the, I know it said the planning commission would get that back to them, but that also needs to come, I think, to the city council. Because that was one of my biggest concerns, was what kind of finish is gonna be on the outside of the buildings. I know, my understanding is that there's no apartments here. A lot of my emails said, we're concerned about the apartments, but there's no apartments. This is all individual homes. Is that correct? Or
They could be a townhouse style where it's multiple units attached, but it's not a traditional apartment style look to it.
well, I didn't think it did because
Right.
this property would actually hold 100 more apartments than what this is showing. So
Correct.
when they mentioned apartments, I think they just meant the multifamily and the townhouses, those type of buildings. But I am concerned about the facade of the outside of that building. So we'll make sure that is in the motion.
Absolutely.
In this track, like the picture you're showing here is different because he's gonna do, like he's proposing doing commercial, like all the way across New Orleans.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So the
Do you
land,
have that picture by chance?
in
It's like
the
exhibit
PUD.
D on one of ours, but.
I can't find,
That did show all the-
I was trying to
That was
find
a little
it and
It
I,
might be
that's
in
what
that
I
one
was
that
looking
you
for.
looked at. Go to the very last 7, I think.
Was it Exhibit D or Exhibit F?
It's in item 7.
Oh,
there.
yeah.
And if you scroll all the way down. You'll get there eventually.
I was just looking for and I
Yeah,
couldn't
it's way
find
down
it.
there.
Is it under the planning commission report?
I think you
Oh, that's,
It's
Yeah.
Exhibit D. I think the mayor's correct. If you keep scanning down, seriously, it's quite a way. It's in the PUD itself.
Yeah.
As an attachment, not that, but the PUD itself.
I'm sorry, that's, I can't even.
No, I stumbled across it. Yeah. Yes, that, it's Exhibit D to that.
Almost
is that what this is?
there.
There,
Here we go.
I just wanted to make sure that, because it has, the proposal is different, so that the housing part of it is all behind and is kind of enclosed back there. So,
yes, thank you for that clarification.
this
That's
is what's on
correct.
the agenda for tonight, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Then I also had a question that the
Mhm.
emails had raised to me that I thought were fair questions. I know the developer has said that they intend this to be townhomes or the equivalent, similar, no more than 4 units per building, I understand.
Correct.
Is there anything in the PUD that ties them to that, where they can't change it after the fact? Or if they were wanting to change it, that would require them to come to council for further approval? If not,
There is.
before I could vote
Yeah.
for this, that would need to be in there.
There
I had the
is
same question because I couldn't
Sure.
find where it was listed that they couldn't go above 4.
okay, on page 3 of that same document, under permitted uses towards the top, it lists specifically multifamily dwellings and uses customarily accessory thereto. No
Right.
more than 4 dwelling units shall be attached unless in a row house type configuration.
And, okay, so that was my question because the unless in a row house configuration.
Yes.
So you could make because I understand, you sent the picture and the questions to show, I mean, what a row house
Example.
is. But you could, so how many could you put of that? I mean, how many of those could you put in a row?
There's not a restriction.
Okay.
So we do have maximum building lengths in RM zoning, so it would need to adhere to that. And I can pull that number in a
Okay.
moment. But there is a maximum for multifamily, just so that you don't have a very long stretch
Well,
of a
that's what
building
I'm-
that continues
Yeah.
and continues.
Yeah, I would kind of like to know what that is before we
Absolutely. I'll
approve anything.
look that up.
And it's still limited to 145 total.
Correct.
And what was the amount that could be there if it was, it's not apartment, it's absolutely not apartment, so.
Right.
It's like
If it
250
was-
or something like that.
Yeah, about 100 more. We calculated
Right.
it the other day.
241, I believe.
And there is I noticed there was something about
Yes.
that
Okay.
there had to be some
Different.
differentiation of like height of,
Mhm.
so it's not just so it doesn't look like an apartment, because that would make it look like more like an apartment if there wasn't any, from 1.5 stories to 2 stories. So that's a requirement in the PUD.
It is.
Okay.
There has to be a variation. It doesn't say the specific mix, but it does require single story and 2-story,
Okay.
so that you have that variation there.
Yeah, because it says the development must include a mix of 1 and 2-story
Mhm.
units. Yeah. And I think that was part of the issue that some people had. They thought it was going to be 3-4 stories tall, but it
Right.
not be over two stories.
And one of the things I think is weird is the fencing situation. I mean, while I understand that they don't want to put a fence because there is a pond back there,
Mhm.
and I guess, I mean, it's it would be like a shared amenity. It just seems weird that you would have multifamily and there not be, I mean, do we have any other cases where we have multifamily and there's no fencing at the back of it?
Not that I'm aware of. I haven't looked at all the cases to compare, but that is a standard requirement for multifamily. Typically, if you have residential next to multifamily, that's a requirement that goes in with
Yeah.
the PUD.
Is there fencing on the other side for like where Rabbit Run is?
No.
Oh, on the south side of the detention pond? I don't believe so.
But
The
Rabbit-
property owners
but
might be able to
Rabbit
put in
Run-
their own.
They have fences for their individual homes.
Sure, okay. But it's my understanding that the developer of Rabbit Run had a discussion and agreed to this shared amenity of this pond or lake.
There is a deed that does an agreement that shows that. So yes, that's correct. There's an agreement that shows that there was a mutual understanding and agreement for the use of the pond and the conservation easement that's there.
For the easement. Because my thought is when you agree to like a shared easement, and I can't speak for the developer and I'll let them speak for themselves, but is that you don't, if we are in, I mean, if it's consistent that we always have fencing with multifamily, that there would be an assumption that if whatever goes in, usually commercial, multifamily, whatever, there's always fencing. So it would be logical to assume that there would be fencing because that's part of what we always do. I mean,
What's unique
what I
in
think.
this is the general or the special warranty deed
Right.
that puts an actual covenant and restrictive covenant on the land, as I understand it, which is actually enforceable in court. I mean, if someone violates a restrictive covenant, you can enforce it and require it to be enforced, which is an interesting process.
It is.
My only concern is that works beautifully as long as Rabbit Run continues to be fully owned by the developer and this continues to be fully owned by Perkins, that developer. But as long as it continues to be owned by both of them, they could also agree to do a new deed without the restrictive covenant. So, I mean, you can agree now if they start selling out parcels, then that changes it because then you'd have to get the agreement of everyone who owns property. So the restrictive covenant's good as long as it's not agreed and later lifted by the same two people who own it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So I would want some sort of understanding of what the finality of this
And isn't it normal that, I mean, like when a HOA takes over a subdivision, I mean, the developer of Rabbit Run would eventually like put it over into the hands of the homeowners.
Right, and that, well, once you sell, I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but once you sell off one lot, then now that owner has a right to enforce that covenant and would be required to remove the covenant later. I'm just saying, while the two developers own both pieces entirety, they can lift it as well as easily as they can grant it.
Okay. I'm just concerned about the fencing. It just seems weird because it also said they were going to have a gate. So you have a gate like that makes no sense to me. Like,
The gate off of
you,
129? Is that what you're thinking? Is that where
Well,
you're saying?
Off
So
the
you have a
access
gate
points from
to
the
a
arterial
fence
streets.
that all you have to do is walk around because there's no fence on the south side. Correct?
That's correct. So, and one thing that it is a unique situation, like you pointed out. And so during our discussions initially is staff had highly recommended adding an abundance of landscaping on the south side to create that visual buffer, even though it wouldn't necessarily be the fence buffering, but it would provide evergreen trees, also shrubs to help conceal the view to a certain degree as well, but just as a way to make it more complementary and to fit in with the natural features there of the detention pond.
It's my understanding they were already required to reforest it. Is that right?
What was that?
They were already required to like reforest it when they took trees out.
So, and that's
There's no
something
trees
that was
there.
on the private covenant side, private deed, is that that was mentioned in the last meeting. You're correct, that if the trees were taken out, they would need to be replaced, but that's not something that the zoning ordinance would require. It's more on the private side. And so what we could require is the increased landscape standard that's in the PUD.
Well, so as I understand, and maybe have either one of these developers sold off any lots or any of Rabbit Run to the south or of because I know it's being developed still. Has it been sold off at all?
The lakes at Rabbit Run.
Whatever's
the-
south of that, because there's so many Rabbit Runs, I was getting confused. And there's too many
There's
rabbits
only
running
one.
around here.
Yeah.
So,
And the applicant can speak better to this. It's my understanding the Perkins family has owned the property that Lakes at Rabbit Run is currently developing and building on,
okay.
as well as the detention pond area. And they still own the site that's under the zoning today.
Because right now, without the fence, if that's what the agreement is,
Mhm.
and people buy a lot with that agreement, then they're buying it because they either accept or don't care. I'm concerned
Correct.
about anyone who owns a lot now,
Mhm.
if those have been sold off.
Yes, they have.
Being in agreement with this. That's my question, if that makes sense. And I would
There's a
want
lot of
It
people.
does.
whoever the developer is, that's a question I'd be interested in knowing the answer to.
Do we want to have the developer come in to speak? Answer some questions.
Very good. Thank you, Jill.
Really.
Good evening. How do I want this? Just the top
That
one?
way.
Okay, great. Okay, Mayor, City Councilors, my name is Mark Perkins. I'm the president of Perkins Real Estate Group, or actually corporation, which is just a family-owned company. Sounds bigger than it is. But I'm here before you tonight in support of the enclave at Southern Trails. It's a mixed-use development proposed for the corner of Olive and New Orleans. Before we dive into the project and the potential of what it can become, I think it's important to understand the history of the property, which is where I'm going to begin. You can see the intersection right here. Okay. So in 1998, we purchased the property, about 60 acres on the southeast corner. That was 1 year after the city of Broken Arrow adopted the comprehensive plan in 1997. And in its future development guide, it established this land as level 3 and level 4 land. And then again in 2003 and 2012, during the future development guide updates in those years, it again reconfirmed those properties, or this one parcel at the time, as level 4 and level 3 land. And then in 2019, as you guys are intimately familiar, after a long process, the city unanimously adopted the next comprehensive plan, which yet again confirmed this property as level 3 and level 4 land. Now, in March of 2021, we bisected the land by laying down a 9.2 acre conservation easement between the project you're considering today and the Lakes of Rabbit Run. And then a month later, we sold them the 27 acres that became the Lakes of Rabbit Run and granted them the conservation easement under the following conditions that are contained in the deed: that it be maintained as amenity for, as beneficiaries of, the tenants and the owners of the adjoining lands owned by the grantors situated to the north, providing a park-like setting and an amenity with grass, biking, hiking trails. And other than temporary construction fences, no permanent fences, walls, barriers, or obstructions shall be provided along the common boundary between the detention and drainage area and the adjoining lands owned by Perkins Development Corporation. So this was always part of the intent to develop exactly as we're proposing now.
So that was in place before a single lot was sold.
Before Lakes of Rabbit Run had even accepted the grant,
Okay.
it was a condition to the grant. Yes.
Okay, so that was in place. So if someone who's buying a lot reads the abstract can see that that's in there.
Yes, it was this. It was the same transaction that gave them the property they developed on, also gave them the conservation easement,
Okay.
and it was all subject to these restrictions.
Thank you.
Now, fast forward just a year and a half later, we applied for the zoning and the PUD application that we're considering tonight. In every way, it conforms to the land uses allowed on this property as it was confirmed in every comp plan and every development guide since 1983. And I rely heavily on that, as do all developers in Broken Arrow, because that's the guiding document. As it says in the plan, it's a policy document that serves as a community's vision to guide future growth and development. So moving forward, as you can see right here, this area on the southeast corner, there in pink, is level 3, and then right on the hard corner, it's level 4 land. And you can see the relationship between the enclave, which is being proposed, the green space, and the Lakes of Rabbit Run. These all came from the same parcel of land. So what is level 3 land? According to the next, it's a transition area. Level 3 represents a transition zone from strictly residential development to strictly non-residential development. And as such, the primary uses for level 3 are higher density residential uses and lower density employment uses. That's what we're considering tonight. It also says this level of intensity should be located adjacent to an arterial street, all of New Orleans. It even mentioned townhouses as a specific example of an ideal use for a piece of property such as this. And it says it's intended primarily for attached residential dwellings, which is what a townhome is, a row house. Now, under Next and its future development guide, Next supports the development of Enclave as submitted, just as it was used a year and a half ago to support the development of Lakes of Rabbit Run. And all the language under this column to the right comes specifically from the PUD application submitted by the Lakes of Rabbit Run. And you'll see all the similarities to what we submit tonight. They're both level 3 land. There's 2 different zoning classifications, both of which are allowed under the zoning ordinance. You can see one is simply a master plan single family attached residential development. The other is detached. Ours proposes 145 units. Theirs was 105 units was the maximum allowable lots. They have the exact same maximum building height. As far as what the setback that abutting the green space, both are 10 feet. You can look back at the language they used regarding screening in their application. It says no fencing is required along the north property line since the conservation area acts as a buffer. Ours says the same thing, but in regard to the south property line. And then under drainage, you can see their language again, especially at the bottom. Detention and retention will also be used to create a lake and amenity for both developments. And ours says the same, because this was always part of an agreement. It was a negotiated bargain. And now we're trying to, change the rules, but it's our right to develop our land, just it was their right to develop their project. So, getting to the specifics, what is the enclave? It's a mixed-use development featuring townhomes and cottage homes integrated through cohesive design elements to retail shops, office space, and restaurants to create a vibrant, safe, and walkable neighborhood. So there's been a lot of confusion because some of the rumors about apartments, but also just the general definitions of things. What's a townhome? It's a 2-story home that we set a maximum height on already that only includes a single family. So there's not tenants living on top of one another. It's specifically not an apartment, which by definition suggests there's layers of tenants on top of layers of tenants. The PUD does specifically say, I don't have the application in front of me, but the reason the development staff had us change the terminology in part of the PD application to row houses is because there's a particular definition for row houses that requires every vertical unit to only have one single family. Vertical structure to have one single family. So that's what differentiates it from an apartment. So every 2-star townhome will be one single family, just as it's a single family detached house.
And what's a cottage?
And a cottage is just a single story of the same.
Okay. Would they have shared walls?
Under this PUD, they're allowed to have shared walls, but that'll be a design choice once we get to the site planning process. But as the planning commissioners emphasized, and I agree with, it feels more like a neighborhood if there's some variation, both in the articulation of the facades, but also the building heights. And so they requested and we agreed to include that in the PD application. Sorry, my mouse straight. Okay, so here is a conceptual development plan. It might be better to pull it up. I think I sent the exhibit. And as we get into kind of the more wonky details of the PD application, I'm going to ask Alan to come up. This is Alan Betchen. He's a civil engineer.
So I get the unenviable task of going through the technical of how we actually lay out the stipulations and the regulations that are in the PUD so that they're enforceable. And that's the document that can actually be governed, and that the council will measure our site plan and elevations that get brought to you back against. The number of attached units, so your question about cottage homes and whether they could be attached, it's limited to 4 specifically within the permitted uses. Any more than 4 has to be specifically in the row house or townhome configuration. The PUD at the bottom of that same page defines row house as single structure, single family living in multiple stories. So no second dwelling family above anyone. So trying to define that in things that are not very clearly defined in the code, but putting those protections in so that the intent is clear and enforceable. It is limiting to 145 units, period. That is, though the underlying zoning of RM would support 241 on the same, just by unit density, if we ran the math and there was no PUD governing. There's been, and I'm sure there will continue to be, a great deal of discussion about the fencing along the south. The concept of fencing within the zoning code is really a screening element between 2 dissimilar uses. Originally, when the developments were contemplated and before it was ever sold, that was thought about of, hey, we do want to have a very clear buffer between the two uses, and a 9-acre buffer was created that's no less than 235 feet in width and varies up to 300 feet in width. That is far in excess of the screening effect of any fence would create. That buffer also serves as a common amenity between the two developments. It's really unique that in my 20 years of doing this, I've never actually seen those caveats rolled into the deed with which they took possession of the property. This isn't some buried covenant and an exception. This was on the deed with which the developer took possession of the property.
I've read hundreds of abstracts. I've never seen that before.
It's
interesting to me.
to tell you how much this was scrutinized and thought through. That should give you a concept of this is not some fly by night concept of we don't want screening. And in fact, their PUD to the south even specifically references that this is the buffer between the two uses. And if you start thinking of it from a screening standpoint, screening and separating the development on the north away from the amenity that was specifically bargained for to the south doesn't make sense. This is a common amenity. This is a park-like setting, 9 acres. That was intentionally, the deed specifies it as an amenity for the tract to the north. So this concept of we need to keep everybody out of that flies in the face of the original agreement with which the developers took ownership of the property. There is additional landscaping because from being very respectful from the staff standpoint of, hey, there is still a screening requirement in the code. And we need to address that those additional screening requirements have been included as far as landscaping and shrubs within that buffer zone along the southern 20 feet, but not strictly screening and separating the access of the properties from them. I would go farther to say the conservation easement is pretty explicit about use and enjoyment and the purpose being open space. So starting to screen that off again flies in the face of what the underlying agreement was. There are no more than 2-story units within the multifamily, period. 35 feet, not 3-story, not 4-story, not that it is restricted in what's presented in the PUD, 2-story. Let me be very clear about that.
Can I ask real quick?
Yeah.
Does the PUD specifically say 2-story?
It
Because I know
specifically
we
says
had that in another PUD. that it didn't
2-story
say.
and 30 and a height of 35 feet. Yes, ma'am.
It does.
Explicitly. Every attempt has been made to try not to create a gotcha or anything that comes forward. We're really trying to create the tightest document to provide the protections because we understand this is an infill project, though we were a little shocked, to be quite honest, in kind of the fervor that we heard as we went to make the application, because from our perspective, if you look at the development plan, you'll see to the north is an arterial street, to the west is an arterial street, to the south is a common 9-acre green space, at least 235 feet in width, and to the east is either commercial mixed-use zoning or another detention facility. So as far as being buffered from adjoining residential uses, I can think of no project that I've been a part of that is more buffered from the adjoining residents than this by meaningful space. This is not your normal multifamily development, and this really isn't intended to be your normal apartment development. They have a pretty specific vision of creating a truly integrated townhome, walkable, mixed-use community.
I do have a question in that vein. The JLL market study that you've included in your materials. I didn't have this until this evening, so I was reviewing it quickly, but it does reference, because many of the things that I'm sure these kind of people will share concerns about is the quality of this construction. Because you can drive around town and see townhomes and things that are not consistent with this neighborhood, right? And I think when people picture this is what they picture. Fairly so, perhaps. So in the JLL market study, it says, in terms of quality and overall amenity offerings, the project will be positioned at the top of the market, which I presume that means the quality of the construction would demand a top of the market rental. are you willing to make this study part of the PUD or part of the record so that we can rely on that representation? Does that make
How do you
sense?
do that?
So in an effort, so specifically.
Do you
to
see what
that-
I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. The question that we get into is one that I've had with this council before. How do we design something? When do we get to the finite details of what the design?
I'm not asking that. I'm
And-
just saying, if you're saying that this is going to be at the top of the market, I want,
Well, I didn't say,
Okay.
let me say that
Understand.
the study was about market saturation because of an issue that's been raised in the past. And, you know, our interests are totally aligned. It doesn't do us any good to build a project and then have them sitting empty. City doesn't want that. We don't want that. And so after those concerns were raised, I hired JLL to say, hey, forget the general, market saturation condition of the city of Broken Arrow. Here's what I'm applying for: 145 units of townhomes and cottage homes. Is there room for this in the market? And will there be over the next 5 years is the horizon. So they ran all their data, sent me that study. They included, because of the nature of what townhomes typically are that they see nationwide, it's a higher end product. So they included that without any prompting from me, because they know that these kind of products tend to be positioned at the higher end of the market. I didn't ask them to get into finishes. That wasn't the purpose of the study. I think they understand that given the submarket area and the nature of what we're trying to build, which instead of garden style apartments are a townhome configuration, that we've already agreed to at least come back and share our elevations with the commission. And it sounds like we're going to agree with the council as well. We want the right to hire professionals to help us design this in a way that's going to position us that fits the neighborhood and puts us at the top of the market. But including that in the PUD is so, I think, penumbral. It's difficult to commit to.
And
I understand, Mike, but you're presenting this to me, I
Right.
presume, for two purposes. One, as an inducement for me to approve this, which means I'm relying on this representation in approving this. Do you see what I'm saying? And we're asking all the people around to rely on this representation. So does that make sense?
What we specifically put in the PUD, and I have never done one that went to this kind of liberal nature, is the elevations in the site plan have to come back before the planning commission and the city council. We're fine with that. But we specifically reserve the right for the council or the planning commission to require facades up to 100% for any one of those exterior facades. While I don't believe that masonry is necessarily the best way to regulate quality, let me go. It is one that is shown in the zoning code and certainly creates a more durable product. While we don't want to tell you, hey, I'll guarantee you 35% natural stone and 15% of this, you have the authority at any right from whatever prerogative you choose laid out within the actual text to require up to 100% on any of those faces. So this is, to some extent, yes, it is kicking the can down the road. And I don't want to represent it as anything else, but it's allowing us to go through and gives us the structure to start building a really comprehensive plan that includes something even a little more complicated than just a multifamily use, but a commercial use that's trying to integrate into that multifamily use and then create a cohesive project that we can bring back to you that you have the prerogative over.
You're answering all my questions. I mean, that's what I'm trying to understand, and I'm wanting everyone to hear. This becomes a public forum, and I want everyone to hear and understand what we're specifically voting on. So you're answering my questions, and I appreciate it.
And that's to be very clear that I've done a lot of PUDs, and I cannot think of one time that a developer has been so willing to offer up that specifically. That tends to be the kind of third rail, and
I got to say, I hate doing that too, because I don't like to put the cart before the horse, and I don't like for everybody in Broken Arrow to make design choices for our project. But I'm so comfortable that we're going to come back with something of high quality that I'm not worried about, the threat of bringing something to you guys and you saying that's not going to cut it. So that's the reason we're willing to agree to that.
And that was the planning commission specifically listened to the input and the concerns of many minutes of input from neighbors and adjoining developers and everything else. And that was a good concession that we didn't originally offer. I want to be clear about that, but it was something that we could find a spot that, hey, that's reasonable, and we want to give you those comforts. So it's definitely extraordinary, but it is something I think that gives you those protections that as a planning commission definitively, but I think also as a council is what you're really wanting to ensure a quality product going forward.
So with what I was thinking about with this, what it sounds like to me, we don't have, Jill, and you might know this offhand, but we don't have the diversity of this housing option where it's this luxury or high-end townhome option in our city, right? And if we're trying to fill up an innovation district with high-paying jobs and people who are going to be looking for this type of housing, we don't have that option for them if it's on a lease basis or whatever. We don't have that option for them. And if we're seeking them to come to our city, but we don't have a housing diversity for them, I mean, this isn't, I feel like some of the stuff that I'm hearing is like, this is going to be some low end.
I think that premise that they're just now doing, I think that's the only one I know of that's rental
Yeah.
that they're
it
doing
just-
right now.
What
But
I'm,
it's
what
like
I'm
4
hearing is that
units.
it's gonna be that
6
luxury, like high end. I know, I attended one of your development meeting and I know that you were asked what the rental rates would be, but it's my understanding, I don't know how you can say what they're gonna be. I know the average rental rate in just apartments in our city is like $1,200 a month is what I think, is what I've heard. That's not inexpensive by any means. So that's more than most people's like mortgages. So, so I know you can't foresee what your rental rates will be because you probably won't even, if this gets approved, won't even be breaking ground, or in my opinion, it would be 3 to 5, I don't even know, 3 years or whatever before it would even be started. Because you have to go through the whole planning part of this and design phase and all of that. So it could be 5 years before it's complete. I don't know, but it's not going to be done tomorrow by any means. And who knows what material costs will be then. So you have to factor all that in. So you're not going to want to lose money on the deal. So I would assume your rental rates will be a little on the high end.
Well, and even in the strictures and the outlines that we're even proposing, you're not going to be able to build this without charging a decent amount in rent just to make it viable.
I always get tickled because a set of apartments were built not too far from my home, and it was up in arms, including me. I was thinking, my gosh, this is ridiculous. And when they were finally built, and these are nice apartments, but they're not luxury, at least they're not proposed as luxury, just nice apartments. A 2-bedroom apartment of about 1,100 square feet costs more to rent than the mortgage payment I have on my 2,500 square foot home. It just cracks me. It's just always interesting to me how the market sets these things.
And it's not.
That's common. I mean,
I would say from pure nuts and bolts, in order to get apartment prices down, right, rent rates down, you have to shove density up. And this flies in the face of that, just right at the face, right? 241 would otherwise be supported by the code. And this is 60% of what that would be. So just by its pure, construction cost divided by number of units equals your rent, you're automatically going to do that because the land cost alone is driving your project into it, regardless of the quality of product that you put on it. I would argue that having a PUD that restricts it as this ensures you're getting a higher quality product than pretty much any other viable level 3 type of development that you would see in that area. If you started thinking about, if we went in and put in an RS4 on 12 acres, what type of housing would you be trying to shove into that type of a footprint? It's going to be a lower quality and something that I guarantee you we will hear from every neighbor about, and that I won't have nearly the same confidence to stand in front of this council and say, this is a better product. This PUD allows us, I think the mayor was pretty quick to catch on to that the zoning layouts don't necessarily conform. One of the things that has happened over time is that hardcore nodal development standard of we had a big kind of junior anchor in the back and then some pads up front. Those junior anchors are kind of gone. That's just not a really viable development pattern anymore. The PUD allows us to move that density into the more appropriate locations for it, which is why you see the commercial spread along those frontages, and also creates another buffer for a pretty high-end multifamily product from the arterial streets, which is not where you really want to be right next to functionally. These are really symbiotic developments. The idea of one is going to create success in the other, and if you do either one of them shoddy, then it makes the other one hard to be very successful at. And that's why it's coming to you as a holistic project instead of some chopped up, he went and sold it to the first C-store that was on the corner, and then we dropped in a coffee shop next to it and a bank on the other end, and then we'll just do whatever we can with the land that's left. This is really a comprehensive thought of how you can develop a corner that has a really unique place, not only geographically in Broken Arrow, but also specifically with its buffering from the surrounding uses. And this is being within the distance that it is of an innovation district in a place where the city is really trying to push forward. This is a unique housing type that really can benefit that type of a use and user coming into the South.
See, like, this makes me think of what we just went and looked at, like Cypress Waters and
Generation Park.
Park, yeah. It's kind of what I think of when
I mean, I don't know how you build those few units without charging a high level of rent to get your money out of it.
I'm the guy who gets stuck with the nuts and the dollars and cents on the end of it, and you can't.
Yeah.
That doesn't work.
It's going to keep me up at night for several years.
Will any of the units have garages, or is it all outdoor?
I mean, I would like for them to. At 35 feet, that's tricky. Honestly, that was probably an oversight on our end, but at this point, I don't think that they're set up to.
There's a potential for you to have a garage on the bottom floor, depending on what your densities look like, and then just have a single story unit above it. Whether the economics of that makes sense, whenever you start getting into just the square footage numbers that you're trying to chase, maybe you could do splits. That's when you get into some of you're not even talking about architectural details. You're really talking about like unit planning down to how many one bedroom or whatever, the kind of nuts and bolts operationally. And there's a whole nother level of study that has to come back into it. And the goal of this is really to set up the boundaries with which to start designing a viable project. If you don't know how many units, that's kind of what would be supported on the project. And that's kind of step one. And it's hard. I mean, every time we come in and we talk about multifamily, we know it's something that's controversial and it inspires a lot of vitriol. And it's very nerve-wracking for adjoining property owners are we doing something damaging to them? So as a developer and an engineer that looks at those projects, originally it's, hey, we need to go in and set up the boundaries that we're working within, because we can't design a reasonable project without that. This one is unique in that we started setting up those boundaries how many years ago? 3 years ago? 4 years ago? Before this, as part of the subdivision to the south. That was the whole concept of the green space and the conservation easement and the reason why it's in the deed. This is not flip. We literally thought, hey, we're going to come and do a product like this. We need to create the buffering so that way we don't create such pain and angst between us and the neighbors to the south. It's shocking that best laid plans, we should have done it sooner. But that was honestly the intent. I don't know.
And it's just another step too. We have a detailed site plan process. So whatever it's tonight, it's not over between us. We got to come back. We got to work with development staff, continue down. And it's, there's a lot of work to be done, but this sets the parameters within which we can do our work.
And hear that this is this is not the first iteration of the PUD. This isn't the second, third. I think we're probably close to number 4 overall of just concessions and modifications we're making in response to the adjoining properties and the hearings that we're having. This was not what we submitted. It wasn't what we had after that. What we took to the first planning commission. It's not what we took to the second planning commission. And then it was changed again as it comes to you today, all in response to what we're hearing. So this has already been very much labored over from a staff and a planning commission level, even before we got to this. This is not just hey, this is what they brought in and we just kind of took it. It's still been worked all the way along that path.
One of the questions that I have is, my constituents and the neighbors of this property had presented to me was as I looked at it the first time, I've lived in Washington DC when I was in the military, a lot of townhomes in Washington DC. And they all are sold, at least they were back then, and wasn't any rentals. So I had a little bit of trouble with it being rental. I thought it being sold would be more pertinent, and I know that was several of the questions that I was asked by the citizens. Can you kind of address that? I'm not trying to argue one way or the other right now, but.
Well, I think Alan touched on it a little bit, is what's appropriate on this specific site in relation to the intersection and the acreage that's remaining, and what you can actually do in there, because that would turn it into an RS4 project.
Or the other mechanisms that you could get to, though not impossible, hear me say that, are you start getting into really more of a condo for this style of development. Because if we were truly townhomes, we'd be on city streets with a certain size lot and public infrastructure, or some combination of privately maintained infrastructure that mirrored public improvement requirements. When you start deviating from that street network type development, which is not super conducive on this size of property, it's hard to make that work functionally. You get into ownership is really done through a condominium agreement, and those create some big challenges from a viable development standpoint whenever it comes to some issues with banking and some other things that come up. It's not impossible, but especially on this scale of 145 units, that's hard to, that's a very risky endeavor to think that the market can absorb it and that it understands it and that the banking's there to support it.
Well, that being said, that the mayor had mentioned our trip to Dallas and Houston a couple of months ago. And I'd already looked at this and heard from the planning commission of this going on. So these were huge areas, but they had a lot of townhouses in those areas. So at each place, I asked the ones that's in charge if they sold them or if they rented them. And they said they tried to sell them to start with, but the market just wouldn't even hold it down there. So all of them were leased, in both of those communities. So it kind of followed up. I didn't have such a hard knock on it.
Well, and if we wanted the commercial, you got to remember there's only 12.2 acres in that development zone. So
the multifamily development zone.
Right.
Yeah. And it's just, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying that would be a very precarious development to get into in this market with that kind of.
Well, the problem with condominiums too is that you sell those off, and then invariably you get someone who buys 3 or 4 and rents those, then they don't maintain them. And you actually end up with a worse development than having one person maintain it or individual owners.
You have a hodgepodge of maintenance, and then it's
Right.
enforced maintenance. And then if you get a guy who owns that's my statement of the problems that I've seen come of them. That there is according to the market study, but certainly in the belief of the developer, there is a market for this in a rental product. And what I would say kind of holistically kind of about Broken Arrow's rates, and this, you kind of hear it all the time, we're at 94, 95, 96% occupancy rate and we're building apartments and then it's still 94. I would tell you that that's a sign that there's a demand in your community for that, and that demand's being met. It's just not being met in your community. So they're still renters. They're just finding their apartments that meet their needs in another community. And in a lot of ways, that's a population, especially in this demographic, that you want to capture from a sales tax benefit and a adjoining maintenance. I mean, it's just a well-maintained product. The math makes it be.
So whenever you, okay, so I mean, I want to ask this and then I kind of want to hear from the citizens that like so I can hear what their opinion is on everything. We say we want luxury and what amenities other than the detention pond area to the south, what amenities will this development have? Is there like a clubhouse, a pool, workout
Well, again, we're
area?
just trying to get our zoning and our entitlements. So there's a lot of thought that's going to go into that. The ones that we put up there reflected what I think I would like to see: a clubhouse, a pool, a gym, maybe a court of some kind. But in order to maintain its character as a mixed-use walkable neighborhood, there'll probably be a lot of walking paths, some green spaces in pockets that form focal points within the development amongst the.
Well, I was gonna say, and that plan will come back to council for final
Yes.
approval.
Yeah, I don't have a crystal ball, and there's a lot of people that are a lot more creative than me that I'm going to rely on to help
Right.
me.
And I get that. And I just want to, I actually really like this development. I mean, I'll just say that because, I grew up and we didn't always own a home when I grew up and we lived in a townhome. And I'm sure it wasn't this nice because it wasn't a new townhome. But when I think of luxury, I just want you to know those are the kind of things I think of that as amenities. And my parents, they own a townhome in Florida. They had a house, they sold their house and bought a townhome and they could afford whatever they wanted, but they chose a townhome and they own it, but because of the upkeep and those type of things. I'm the one that actually have talked about the having so many apartments, and you addressed it. And I apologize, I couldn't meet with you before Christmas. I work full time, and it was like I had to buy Christmas presents.
It's tough.
I'm sorry, my grandkids went out over you. Sorry, but one of the things that, and I do think this is different, and so that I will say that. And I have the numbers, as of today, we have 7,214 apartment units in Broken Arrow. And if we're at like 95% occupancy, we have like 289 available units. We currently have 888 already proposed apartments or multifamily. And those are already approved. I'm sorry, 888. And over 1,200 proposed multi-units that are 1,200 proposed in Broken Arrow. So we have 2,088 already approved or proposed. So that is what my concern has been, is that, that's an increase by 29% in apartments or multifamily over what we currently have. And those are not built. Some of them are approved and some of them are just out there that trying to get approved. And that's not even including this. And so that has been my concern, is that we just keep having, and I want community development to hear me. I want us to be very intentional in our housing. And we do have a study that's happening right now, intentional in our housing in Broken Arrow, because I think we have a need for all of it. I've lived in apartments. I was not a trashy person. So I don't think that is what apartments are. I don't. And I'm still not a trashy person. So, and I actually, I live by here. You can't see my house in that picture, but I live just south of there. And so these are my neighbors. And this is my ward. So I do have I have the concerns about, we have so much being developed right here. We have schools that are that I am concerned about, but that 145 townhomes or yeah, 145 townhomes aren't gonna, that's not gonna be the, like, you know, the straw that broke the camel's back as far as our schools. But I worry because we have developers come in and they say, you know, we're developing this, and then they sell off their property or sell off the units. And then it's like, it worries me that it's not going to be what you said it was going to be. And I'm just being very like transparent and like of what my feelings are. So I just want to make sure that when we use the word luxury, that it is indeed that. And part of that is that what Johnny brought up earlier with Councilor Parks brought up earlier about masonry or whatever it is. I mean, that's more high-end finishes. And because truthfully, I mean, and I know that this developer for Spectacular is going to speak in a minute, but I really appreciate the developments that they have done in our community. They are high-end, beautiful developments that there's really not a lot like them in our city. And I don't live in either one of them, but I mean, those are above my price point. So, but saying that, I understand the residents of these subdivisions and why they would be concerned that, you know, they want to keep their property values. This is their, many of those in Rabbit Run, I'm not going to speak to your age because I'm there too, but you know, this is their home that they're staying in, that they're not going to move again. And so these are high-end homes that we want to make, that they're worried they're going to lose their property values. And so I just want to make sure that we're aware of that when we make any decisions. And the multifamily stuff does concern me a little bit because I feel like we just keep approving stuff. And I'm like, okay, we're at like, you know, we've increased it now by almost a third and we just keep adding on. But I do think this is different. And I do think we don't have, with the exception of what Primus Properties is doing, which I think they have like 6 units. We don't have anything, I don't know, like this that we're actually renting in Broken Arrow.
Well, I'm happy to respond to a few of those points, but I assume that we're going to hear some of those same comments from the public. So if you want, I'll just wait until the rebuttal and try to address them all at once.
Okay.
Is that?
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you, guys. So we'll go ahead and hear from the citizens that want to speak. The first one I have is Donna Rourke.
I was the last one.
Yeah. It's okay. Someone always has to go first.
I thought they would let Brett go first since he's the developer of Rabbit Run Lakes. Hi, I'm Donna Roark. I live in Rabbit Run, not the lakes, but the run. And my concerns, and I've done a lot of research trying to figure out, but when you have rental people, transient, what I call transient consumers, there tends to be more crime. And that is why, as a homeowner, we tend to think that, oh, you know, our home values are going down, and everybody's always asking us, what's, you know, prove it. So I started looking at the Broken Arrow crime rates, and where we're currently sitting, that whole corner is sitting in an A+, virtually no crime. When you start overlaying where the rental properties are, you start to see where they get C's, D's, and F's. And that tends to also come with commercial. When you have retail commercial, you start to have more crime. So that is why one of the things that we're concerned about is the value of our properties, because it is going to affect the crime rate. You know, you see that Tulsa's first homicide happened at a multifamily unit already. So that's not unique to Broken Arrow or to Tulsa either. The other thing that I have a real concern about is there's already, when you look at the lakes, you look at the complex, there's a housing unit getting ready to go onto the east side of what they're proposing. They've already broken ground and they're currently, sorry, I'm a little nervous. They've already broken ground and started laying streets. If you look at that one, you look at the lakes, and then there's another one going across the street from the Assemblies Church. When you add all of those three up, there's over 300 homes that are getting ready to be put into that corner already. The school system, I have a granddaughter who attends Wolf Creek Elementary. She was already put into first grade. They had a nice classroom. The kindergarten was overcrowded, so they may now first grade and kindergarten both are overcrowded. So when you throw in another 300 families, another 145, you have a school system that can't handle it. And God forbid you try to drive down 101st when either one of those schools are either taking kids in or releasing them. You might as well just forget it. And so if these people are going to be coming out on 101st at basically 8:30 to 9:30, you better stay home. So I guess I ran out of time, but
Thank you.
You
so
don't have to
thank
be
you.
nervous.
Huh?
You did great. You don't have to be nervous.
Okay, thank you.
And full disclosure, I have a daughter who goes to Oliver. I'm well acquainted with the traffic.
Yes, it's awful.
Don't go anywhere near schools coming and going.
Yeah, anywhere in the
I know
city.
that. Elizabeth Ray.
Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Diane Ray, and I am a resident in Rabbit Run, another rabbit, subdivision located in Broken Arrow. First, I want to thank you for meeting with us and hearing our concerns about the proposed development at 101st and Olive. I'm reminded of the graphic of the heron, the bird, standing on one leg in a pond, and he has a frog in his mouth, and that frog is clutching the heron's neck. So therefore, the bird can't swallow the frog. The caption on that is, "Never, ever give up." I don't think we're going to give up. Your constituents regarding the proposed development are the frog. Needless to say, this has been a journey for me. I've learned a lot about the process of our local government and who the members of our planning commission are and who our city council persons are. On January 2nd, I sent each of you an email. Whether or not you read it, I don't know. But for the record, I'd like to touch the major concerns and questions in that email. The enclave Southern Trails does not fit in with the character of that area. The development will result in a substantial impact of privacy on the residents at the lakes at Rabbit Run. Again, in that email, I reiterated the past concerns expressed by area, the whole 1/4 circle area. At the initial meeting with the planning commission, on the video, these are referred to as apartments over and over again. Okay, approval of this development will result in up to an additional 145 households, bringing the total of just under 700 additional households added in the past 5 years. That's including the retreat, which is east of proposed development. It is including the Pine Valley, which is across from the assemblies. And lastly, I'd like to ask about who was notified of the public meeting.
Please finish.
Okay, who was notified about the community meeting being held at the remote location? There were only, it was reported there were only 30 in attendance. Couldn't find it. And, anyway, who was notified? I did contact the developer, Mr. Ruhl, R-U-H-L. He's doing the retreat, which is next to this development. And I asked him, was he notified? And he said no.
We'll have Jill can give us the
Okay,
specifics who was.
okay. And was it put in the newspaper?
Yeah.
Do you want me to stop?
You're out of time. I just want you to wrap up your thought.
Okay. I do not feel leased or rented units in this area would be a good fit. I respectfully request that council not to approve the POD as it is written.
Thank you so much. The next one we have, oh, Jill, yes, I'm
Yes.
sorry.
I could speak to two different items. We do have two separate, or one notification that the city sends out, and that was for the public hearing at Planning Commission. And so whenever we have any multifamily zoning, the radius for notification increases to a 1/4 mile. So letters were sent before it went to Planning Commission to property owners within a 1/4 mile, and a sign was placed on the property, and then a newspaper publication was posted. For the community meeting, I know that especially after council voted to continue this item in order to have a community meeting, I know city staff had provided direction to invite neighboring surrounding property owners, representatives of those neighborhoods, and city council and city staff, so we'd have the opportunity to attend as well. That meeting was a private meeting, and it wasn't organized by the city, so there weren't required notifications that had to be sent from the city's perspective, but the developer could probably speak to their address list of who it was sent to.
So the city complied with state law requirements of notice.
Correct.
And the private meeting, I wasn't notified of it.
I wasn't even.
I didn't know about it. So you guys notified of it?
I saw it on the events, on our council events notification, and then I did meet with the developer.
What are you talking about?
Like where they have to post when there's 3 or more of us at a location, it was on that. That's
Oh, like
that's
you
where I
went
saw
to
it
the
first.
brokenarrow.gov website and looked.
That's where I found it.
Same radius.
Are you looking for such things? to do?
No, I was looking to make sure another event was posted, and I saw that, and so I put it on my calendar. I just want, because if 3 of us are together, Trevor, it has to be posted, just for those of you that may not know that. So I was just making sure that an event I was going to was posted, and then that's when I saw.
And I found out because I ran into you and you told me, so I went.
I want nothing.
Nobody ran into you.
We didn't run into you.
Well, I would have definitely gone, considering I lived there right there. So, yeah.
So I think I just heard the developer, you said you sent it to the same.
Exact
1/4
same 1/4 mile radius. And being the holidays, churches were booked. The library said that they would have to run it through the board of directors because we're not a nonprofit. And so we found the one place that would accept us, and that's where we had
It was pretty well attended. I mean, all the seats
I
were
thought,
taken.
yeah, for neighborhood meetings, that was a very well-attended
I heard it was good.
neighborhood meeting, yeah.
Let's see, Lindsay Perkins is the next one.
She's gonna talk.
No,
Ma'am, yeah.
but she's not signed up.
You have to be signed up. And,
He's gonna
yeah,
have to talk.
Lindsay signed up, sorry.
I just want
She's
to,
my mom.
Yeah,
we have never done a shoddy development.
thank you, thank you.
Is that really?
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah.
It's his mom.
Okay. Let's see, our Brandon,
My mom would do the same thing.
Yes.
our Brandon Perkins.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I got a famous last name here tonight. I own a very, very small portion of, well, I'm the brother of Mark and the son, middle son of Lindsay and Diane, you just heard from. And I own a very, very small portion of that property that we're talking about. What I do want to address is the property that I do own. I've developed Southern Trails Estates, which I currently have in excess of $1 million worth of lots left in there. I'm currently developing the Village of Southern Trails, which is about an $8.5 million project. And so I have a huge vested interest on how this property goes. And I would, and they know, I would be standing against this project if I thought it would hurt property values. So if I, like I said, I've descended or gone against my family many times about many subjects, and I would have no problem doing that here tonight. Also, really wanted to address real quick is there was a question about, is there commercial property in Broken Arrow that backs up to residential? At 111th and 111th and Elm, there's Walgreens there in the northwest corner. That's exactly what we're talking about right now. There's a green area that has Walgreens, no fence, and residential. I looked around tonight and it happens all over the place. So I would say that, yes, that is happening in this area. And so that's all I have unless you all have any questions. All right. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Brad Hoffman. You're in the middle, it says.
Yes. Mayor Wimpy and City Council, thank you. Good evening. I am the developer of the lakes at Rabbit Run. When this project was introduced to the community, it was introduced as multifamily. And I thank you all for the ability to have a community meeting and encouraging that. That really helped a lot. The developer has refined and defined his product and what he would like to do there. It is not a 3-story multi-family apartment complex, which apartment was used in the original documents. And I think that is scary. The luxury townhome use is a much better use. They have defined that. They have put that in the updated PUD. So it is a different document. I am still concerned about, it states in here on page 3, RM district except is hereinafter modified. And it says multifamily dwellings and uses customarily accessory thereto. And I'm not sure if that allows other type of multifamily within that. And then no more than 4 dwelling units shall be attached. It does go on to say that unless it's a row house or townhome unit, and I think that is a product, a luxury product, if you have the right materials, could be a good use there. But it has to be luxury, and it needs to be the townhome, not an apartment complex. So I would like to just make sure, have city council and planning and zoning make sure that's well defined as the only use allowed in there. And also on the exterior elevations and the facades, you can show a pretty picture and have poor materials and they look great. Until you know what those materials are, you can touch them, you can feel them, you know what they are. You don't know how long they're going to stand the test of 15 years. And that's what we're concerned about. It is, and that's why we would like to see masonry products. We know that brick, stone, stucco We know those are proven materials that stand the test of time, and that's what we would like to see on that product in the future. So I think it would make me feel more comfortable if at least 80% of that is guaranteed to be those type of products, with the city council and planning and zoning still having the ability to make sure it's a luxury product with up to 100% masonry. So I think there were some good compromises. I think the city neighborhood community meetings are very important and should be almost required in the future. It allows
Helps you to
us
understand better.
to work that out. But I think our concern is luxury and reducing down to a townhome, I think is a good product and transition between that and commercial. Okay. Thank you. Do y'all have any questions? Thank you.
Randall Elliott.
I'm Randall Elliott, been a citizen of Broken Arrow for 45 years. I love this community and want to thank this council and the past councils for the great way you've grown the community and as well as you've done here. I also built a new home in Nottingham Addition in 2000, lived there for 18 years, and then we liked what they were doing in Rabbit Run, so I built a new home there in 2018, and we moved in that house in 2018. So I've been in this area for 22 years. Very familiar with it, love the area. I'm like the first person that talked. I'm concerned about crime with the development of commercial and the rental properties. I also have, and you've already addressed New Orleans, even though it's widened to 3 lanes around 3 o'clock, unless you drive down that middle lane, which is against the law, you can't go anywhere. And so, and of course, Olive is 2 lane all the way from Creek Turnpike south. And then you've got New Orleans to the west that's just 2 lane. And I don't think in the near future, so I think the road infrastructure just want to hold more people with concentration like this. So I'm opposed to it, and I appreciate all your help. Thank you.
We do have other residents that have signed up, but they do not wish to speak.
How many?
Are they for it, against it, or?
For, against.
And they're against.
To addressing his, I mean, a couple people brought up, or more than a couple, and plus emails about traffic. What are, city manager, I know you have our GeoBond projects memorized.
Yeah.
So what, do we have because I don't know that we have widening plans for any of that right now.
That's correct. The widening we just completed was a 2014 project. In 2027, I will include actually the roads in this area, especially the New Orleans from Olive to Garnett. Then we need to look at the actual 100 going from 101st to 111th. That area needs to be widened as well, and so those will be included in the package that we'll be presenting to the council for the next bond package.
I mean,
Okay.
I think we need to widen everything. I think Olive is the next Aspen. I think we need to look at widening over, have a plan at least widening it from Kenosha all the way south.
I'd like to make just a casual comment on the, talking about the crime. And knowing that we have one of the best police and fire departments in the state, and going back to our commercial property, it's really important to this council and to the city is to have the right commercial property. The sales tax, 75% of the sales tax from the city sales tax is used to pay for our police and fire. So they take 3/4 of that city sales tax. So on this particular project, I know we haven't talked a lot about it, but the commercial is really the most important to me anyway. We certainly want everything else. We want quality, multi-family, we're going to call it for now. But you want to keep in mind that the commercial is what we're really looking at. You know, when those townhouses are built or your subdivision was built, we might have got some city sales tax, and this is not my expertise, but I can tell you that we might have got some of the tax from the property, the construction building materials that the city did, and that's it as far as getting it, unless it's an ad valorem tax. It has to be used just for streets. So the city sales tax is important. The commercial property here is very important for our police and fire.
The other thing I would add about crime, interestingly enough, is in most apartment complexes, not that this is one of what's being proposed, but most apartment complexes, there are applications, background checks, credit checks, and other things. When you buy a house or you rent a house, that doesn't happen. You don't get to do an application on who moves in next to you in the house. And actually, in the apartment complex that was built a quarter mile from my house has less crime than the neighborhood behind my house, where I don't know who's living back there. At least like the apartment complexes, they know who's living in their apartment complexes. That's not to give you any, I'm just saying that crime is something that is endemic of aging neighborhoods, not necessarily high density neighborhoods. As neighborhoods age and they overturn, apartments tend to age faster. So you see it faster in apartments sometimes. But the product we're talking about tonight, I know the lady, and I did get your email. I read every email I ever get. I don't always respond because on this project, especially, I've gotten like 30 or 40 in the last 24 hours, which is good. Good. I'm glad you are. But please know I read them all. If I respond to them all, it could take a long time just to say the same thing. But the thing I would say, and I remember your email because with your comment, what was initially, because I followed this from first, second, third, the iteration today looks nothing like what the iteration was. What we're voting on today is this, and you asked us not to vote for this as it's presented, but as it's presented, it does address all the concerns that you raised about crime, about the nature of what's being rented. These aren't low-end apartments. These are high-end things. I am familiar with the Perkins. I don't know of any project they've ever done that was not a good project. They may have one out there, and they're not going to tell me if they did, but every project I'm familiar with that the Perkins has done has been a quality project. But that doesn't mean they get screened any differently than any other developer in the city. We have to follow the process, right? But with the crime issue, that usually tends to be more of an issue of aging neighborhoods, not necessarily density of neighborhoods. So, and as Councilor Parks said, we pride ourselves on having the best police department in the state. The chief standing back there, and every time we say that is yeah. So, I mean, we pride ourselves on that. We watch that very, very closely. It's something we study as a council very carefully because who wants to live in a crime-ridden city? So we're not going to have a crime-ridden city. That's something we watch very closely regardless in any part of town. Because any part of town, the most luxurious, in fact, higher crime rates are in luxury areas because that's where the money is. You're going to have theft. It usually happens in an expensive home than it does in a less expensive home because there may or may not be anything in the less expensive home. It's not to say that your concerns aren't warranted. They are. But it's to say that the statistics and the numbers don't necessarily bear that out entirely. and we watch that very closely. Traffic, I did have a question. Has a traffic study been done, or will it be done? Because if it's not, that's going to be required if I vote for this PUD. Can anyone answer that for me?
So we have done a traffic impact just from a general trip.
It's Mike, coming back down, please.
I'm sorry, I asked a question, then, yeah. I do that. That drives the council crazy.
No, it doesn't. So.
We have done just a preliminary traffic impact analysis, trying to get a number of trip generation hearing that. It is not a full-blown study because studies are an analysis of the intersections and capacity, and that really depends on exactly what the commercial configuration, because the commercial is going to generate the traffic, not the multifamily. But that's been bore out in the
So
traffic.
the short
impact.
answer is, since this has commercial and does have higher density multifamily, are you willing to make the?
Well, I
approval
assumed
of
the
PUD?
city would require that, but given that that was a concern, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's just part of the process as we move past today.
Okay.
So I assumed that to be true, but since it was a concern that was raised, I did have a trip generation report done and a letter written that gives us, so I could respond tonight to the concerns of folks, that gives us an idea of what it might look like. And its conclusions indicate, if I can find it.
Section 5, page.
I read it. I'm asking for the benefit of everyone else.
Yeah, I understand. It indicates
2,400, so essentially 4,800 trips, which an incoming and an outbound constitutes a trip. So that's 2,400 callers a day in peak commercial build out over a 24-hour period. That is not, the peak hour was actually a lot smaller than really what I thought from an engineering standpoint. I was kind of surprised, honestly, from the numbers that it came back as. It was, the AM was 159 and the PM was 372.
So it's
peak hour
about
trips.
3 cars per minute added in the morning and 7 cars per minute added in the evening.
And so another traffic thing is we often hear these comparisons, and it's almost always driven. If a school's nearby, it's 3 o'clock is the time that everyone's concerned about, right? That's not actually peak travel times for commercial uses. Those usually lie outside of that time period, AM or PM. The AM is actually a little closer, but in retail, the AM generations, just as they're laying out, are about
So
half.
if the traffic study that is required says you need to add a decel lane here or an acel lane here to then that's going to be done. Correct?
That's a city requirement.
And that
Same with requiring us to give right of way for during the plating process in case they need to eventually do widenings. And I have to say that the traffic generation report I requested was specific to this project. It assumed 145 units and about 57,000 of retail. And they said that 80% of those trip generations would be driven by that commercial side.
which is that's very much the site plan that you see is those numbers bore out. So as far as footprints of what commercial would look like on it, that's where those numbers came from as far as what it would yield.
Well, I didn't like your original proposal that came before the planning commission.
Up on that.
Yeah.
Left and right.
Yeah. No, I just.
I have to say that it never said apartments. Now,
Yeah.
maybe
Well,
a city knows
it
it,
was-
but not one time was
It
that
was
conceived
discussed.
or
It was
applied.
discussed at the planning commission, and I listened.
Yes.
But what I will say is what I have today. The only thing that makes me nervous has been the common ownership and what happens if and when you sell this. What kind of reliance do the surrounding neighbors have that what you build will continue to be managed in a way consistent with what you're telling us today. I like this because it is unusual. So everyone should know this is unusual for a developer to be willing to submit themselves to the planning commission and the council to give 100% approval of fascia and all that. That's rare. In fact, I don't, well, it's ever happened.
I don't know that I actually was going to say something
In 8
about
years,
that.
I've not seen that, and Johnny
No.
might, Council
Not
Park.
very often.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I
So
mean,
I do like that. So as far as the quality of what's going to be built, I know I get to have a say on that. And so, and I have their ear, and it's important that I carry their ear. So I would like an answer to that question. What kind of assurances can we give those about how this will be run in the future? Does that make sense?
I mean, I think we've already given those assurances by coming back, by being willing to come back to, first of all, the site planning process itself provides assurances. Second of all, we've gone above and beyond by being willing to come back and subject ourselves yet again to judgment in front of both the commission and the city council. But I can't, in good conscience or in good business, allow neighbors to design our project for us.
And specifically in the same, you have no more assurance than if you developed a subdivision and your neighbor came in and was flagrantly ignoring the regs or bought enough houses to amend the covenants. There's always some inherent risk of someone going rogue. The idea that you have is that whenever we institute such high-level design standards, that the inherent costs in the original construction and then any subsequent transaction that happens thereafter still has to bear the market forces, right? So rates can't go down, and you have to maintain the quality to demand the rent rates, and the rent rates are necessary to be able to service the debt. I mean, that's just the economic side of it. I know that sounds really callous, but the math says that it can't degrade quickly. And typically, if you have a well-performing asset, that doesn't usually jump ship until you have a lack of maintenance. That's, it's delayed maintenance that gets you. It's the third generation, not the second generation, and maintaining high quality building materials, which is what I think the council has keyed in on, and what we're bringing back to you is the best way to ensure it jumps that second generation and you still have a quality product that can demand those rent rates. No one can guarantee you that it's going to not be a problem in 20 years, but the math of it says if you build it, developers aren't in the business of losing money, and banks that loan against that money aren't in the business of having their assets be devalued that quickly. They have a vested interest in it as well. And sometimes the answer is macroeconomic forces just don't let it go that way normally.
And somewhat relatedly, I also think that there's some measure of comfort that can be taken in simple self-interest. One of the important aspects about this being mixed use, especially one that's trying to be developed under a cohesive plan, is the commercial side of me is incentivized by maintaining the quality of the residential side, and vice versa. They have a symbiosis, an economic symbiosis with each other. So I wouldn't want to cut any corners on one side because it'd just harm me on the other side. And the idea is to create a destination neighborhood.
Oh, go ahead.
I would say this type of development concept that you see, which is a holistic mixed-use concept, is more likely to lead to long-term sustainability than if you just went in and you pad-sided out what each individual user was, and then it just becomes this coffee shop or this corner, and then you have a degradation of the commercial that then bleeds over into problems within the multifamily. So keeping it holistic, which is the point of this, really helps lead to long-term stability in the project as much as anything can.
Okay, I think that as we look at this and looking at the planning commission and council reserves the right to look at this in a future meeting. And it's mentioned here that the neighboring residents will be notified. Is that going to be an official type notification? Or are you just going to let them know when that meeting is, or what?
We will send out an official letter to all the property owners that originally received a notice. And basically from that radius report that's provided by the applicant, Depending on the time frame, we may need an updated radius report because if it is 1 year from now, by the time we get a site plan application, we want to make sure that the people that are now living in that area, maybe new property owners, are notified.
I just thought it was a good idea since it's been such a big item. It has changed as the last few months as we've looked at it. I think it's a great project. Now I think you did a good job of presenting that. And I look forward to it being part of the community and letting the citizens know that that next step, which we're going to look at that final site plan, that it will be a meeting that you'll be notified that you can be here and be part of that and see exactly what's going on.
Now we require the things that are.
Right.
So,
Require the things
I do have a
that,
couple other questions. First, I still think it's weird that we don't have I never wanted a fence to be like screening. That wasn't I don't. Do you not think it's weird having a gate
So
where you
here-
can just walk around it?
So
Is
totally, your concerns are completely relevant. And the best way I can explain this is I had the same concern. We did a fence project at TU. This has been 12, 15 years ago, long time. They were having a big car break-in issue on campus. And so we went all over campus building these fences and pedestrian accesses, but not a single driveway was ever secured. So you have this fence and then all the drives. And I remember as a young EI at the time, I was like, this doesn't make logical sense to me because I can just drive my car in there and steal. And the answer that we got from the security people was it's not necessarily the actual security. Security a lot of times is the perception of security and that there is a feel that it's being watched and it's being maintained. Same kind of concept with vigilant neighbors and that gating from and restricting the gated access, which is required within the PUD right now. That was a requirement of the Planning Commission. Means that you don't just get anybody driving in other than people who gate jump, which is just like it would be in any residential neighborhood. The idea of creating a screened area away from the amenity is really contrary to the residents of that being able to use and enjoy that amenity. I don't think that you're going to have a significant criminal element trying to trudge through the green space to get back into any of the homes in the lakes or up there.
So the gates are restricting automotive access.
Automotive access.
Not pedestrian access.
No, 'cause you
There
can just
usually
walk
will
around.
have a pedestrian gate adjoining
Oh, I
it
got
just from a
that.
physical, because it still needs to be walkable. The concept is that these are still being able to feed off of each other, but that's the idea.
Because the concept is it's a park-like setting. So not only putting it,
Well, I was
setting
just seeing if they
aside
could wrought
what
iron.
was agreed
That's
to years ago,
Understand.
setting that part
I
aside,
just think it just
Uh,
confuses me.
it actually would violate the conservation easement itself. It's supposed to be an area that animals can run through. So it's not only the spirit of the agreement, but it's actually the recorded document that has an independent 501c3 that oversees it.
Well, unless you both agreed on it, then it's,
There's a
I bet
separate,
they would agree.
there's a third part. I don't disagree with you, but this is complicated and it's.
I
just
mean,
for
I
your
know we're not gonna
There's a
agree on
third
this,
party
so
that actually
it's-
manages.
But
the
think of it like
Makes
a
no
park.
sense to me.
Yeah.
You know, most parks don't
I
have
get it.
fences around them. Most neighborhoods don't have fences around them. They can choose
In our
to,
city, they do.
huh?
In our city, they
We
do.
do along that trail. It's a fair statement.
So does just speaking about that, is the lakes, because obviously I think they're gated, right?
Yeah.
Does it have a fence on the backside? Is it fenced all the way around?
Their
people
PUD
walk
at
around.
least
Well, but they
explicitly
have
says it
a-
wasn't required.
They have
Now, whether they
fencing,
individually
the
did
houses
it.
have. People have fences.
There's
But you can
portions
opt
of it
not
that
to.
don't have any
Yeah.
houses abutting.
I don't know if you can or not. I don't know.
In the
if
lakes, no,
HOA.
you don't have to have a fence.
The
But,
lakes at Rabbit Run.
Oh, I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
well, but specifically, if you recall, in their PUD application, they said
Yeah.
abutting the conservation space, we're not required to put a fence in
Yeah.
because it's a common.
Okay.
That's why I mean.
All we're asking is the same thing.
I'm sorry. I'm going.
Actually,
like-
I understand.
Okay, but
understand
let's
why.
totally shift gears here. We haven't asked a question at all about the commercial part of this. So, what is do we have a plan? I mean, I see this is going to be the permanent PUD where the commercial is kind of go around.
The
Okay.
area that is designated as commercial.
I do have, okay, so I saw that we're limiting, or we're changing the minimum, whatever, like the driveways, where it went from 200 to 100
Oh, that's a good
feet.
point. And
And so that
So-
worried me a little bit, because
let's
how many
talk about
driveways are we gonna
exactly
have on our
where that
first?
is, because I think it's important.
Yes.
So if you look in that northeast corner of the site, oh, that's awesome. There we go. If you look right here, that's the driveway separation that we were really
Point to
looking
that
at, is
one. I
the
see it.
opposing
Can you see?
separation. Oh yeah, I probably should
Yeah.
point
You can point to that one. Yeah.
This one right here.
Okay.
There is an opposing driveway separation within the zoning code,
Mhm.
and that is a secondary access to the church to the north.
Mhm.
And because of where the CEM versus the rest, so development area A and B lie, that makes the logical sense for where the second access point needs to be. And if you tried to put one in between it, it would artificially break it up in kind of a non-viable development pattern, because there's already two driveways and they create a spacing that's very narrow for where our drive could align. The location that we're showing, the only place that we're really looking at that exception is really right in that area, which is between this and that drive. These are only opposing spacing. We're not changing the same side spacing, and we're not creating any more accesses than what otherwise would be allowed by the code for the same frontage track. All the same common access limitations are still presented within the CG and the CM districts, and it's developed entirely in conformance with CG, with the exception of a little narrower lot minimum.
Mhm.
And then we actually added restrictions for height.
What's the difference between the CG and the CM? I can't.
In
I
our
can speak to
PUD
that.
uses, there's a few use differences
Okay.
between them.
But multifamily is not allowed.
It's specifically excluded, so it would be
Okay.
allowed within CM, but it's specifically excluded from our CM portion
On
to
the, in the
make sure that
BD.
to preserve the integrity of what we were trying to show. Staff was really good about catching that, because I never even thought about
Yeah.
putting multifamily in there. So that was specifically excluded.
Okay.
There's a lot of differences between CG and CM in development standards, but we're using CG's development standards with CM's uses.
Well, and with that, if you, changing this to that, if there wasn't, like, if you did sell a property, they could not put apartments there.
That's correct. That's restricted. Yeah.
So another question, Jill,
Mhm.
so to the east, what is it called? Rules,
The retreat.
the retreat. That little commercial area that's there,
Yes.
where is that driveway gonna be?
It is proposed just right off of you can kind of see the street outline to the east. The
Mhm.
access would be from that street there.
So it's
We
from
don't
the
want to create,
residential street?
correct. We don't
Okay.
want,
So there's
basically
nothing onto
adding-
101st from that commercial property?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or New Orleans, why did I call it that? New Orleans. Gotta use the Broken Arrow
And
words,
I can
use
do
my
the north
words.
south, the east west give me. Those are the ones I have.
As soon as I hit send this morning, I was like,
Oh, that's just, that's
You
not
have
good.
to be bilingual to live here.
Okay, that's good.
I think one of the main things, what I just brought up is, my favorite part about this, apartments cannot go there because of the changing of the zoning.
See,
Currently, it can.
that's the thing I like about a
Apartments can go there.
PUD is if we don't do a PUD, and this is a common misconception, and every meeting I've ever talked about a PUD, if we don't do a PUD, our control over what goes in is actually reduced. They could come to us and say, we want to zone this X, and you have to zone it that way because the comprehensive plan requires it. And we're going to put as many units as we want to. With this, the city has a lot more control. They're ceding a level of control to allow us to come to something that has less density actually, and comes out with a product that they've deemed to be affordable. I hope it is for you. Likewise, reduces the amount of homes that can be built and gives more control to the city about what happens there. Like the mayor pointed out, no apartments in that CM, which would otherwise be available. So that's why I know Councilor Parks has said for years he likes PUDs, and I do too, for this reason, this very reason. because it limits uses and allows us to have a better communication and working relationship with the developer to come up with something that may not be ideal to what the neighborhood wants, is a lot better than what the neighborhood could get without the PUD.
And it cannot be changed without a public hearing. I mean, it's that way 20, 30, 40 years down the road, that PUD stays with it. I like a PUD. A lot of developers come in, they just really don't like it. So the other cities don't use it. I don't know why, but you get that control of it, the city does. And I think this is a good project. They could go through it for couple of months.
Jill, okay, so right now, current zoning, what could someone come in there and do? Like as far as multifamily, if we did not have a PUD?
You could have traditional garden style apartments. We do have specific design standards that are involved with that type of development. Also, single family attached uses are allowed, and even single family uses are allowed within RM, but it really opens up quite a few opportunities for development. Like you mentioned earlier, the PUD really ties that down.
Single family attached is like a duplex, a traditional duplex.
Could be a duplex or a traditional townhouse where there's 0 lot line and you have a shared wall, but there is a property line that separates those.
And how many units, do you know?
So
Up
it would
to
be
240.
241, that's right.
241.
Just when you say planners use a lot of speak, but the average person doesn't understand. So that's
Yes.
why I take the minute to explain.
But us knowing that, probably if they asked for the apartment zoning, we would give it because it's 241. That intersection wouldn't hold that many.
I don't have any more questions at this point.
Any more questions?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
The PUD, I noted, did not, as submitted and as was pointed out, as it's written, the PUD as it's submitted does not specifically state, or I didn't find it, that the council has final approval of the design standards. And I think Councilman Parks pointed that out. So
Right.
any motion relative to that would need to include that.
And I'll talk to Jill, but she knows that.
So what did we decide? How are we wording it for facades?
That'll come back to us.
That'll come back to us with that. Okay.
It's gonna go to the planning commission, and then the planning commission's gonna come to us.
Okay.
And actually, the planning commission has the right to require up to 100% masonry if they wish to.
Okay.
So it'll come to us as a recommendation from them.
And important, that comes with another public hearing where you can come and address your concerns.
And we want to make sure that the row house, like that we know how many can be in a row. Like how many row houses can you get in a row?
So our code does not have a maximum for that, but it has a
Okay.
maximum for the building length,
Right.
and it's 160.
So,
So one thing that we could add with that too is with the site plan coming back before planning commission and city council is that you'd have the opportunity to specifically review the length of the building and the number of units that are attached.
And I'm one of the requirements that came in at the very end of our last one was staff was mindful of that 160-foot limitation. And so in the PUD, and I just want to be very clear about this, that 160-foot limitation is removed. So if it's in row house configuration, there's no limit on the continuous line length that's allowed within the PUD. However, you still have facade and elevation and site plan review under the purview of the council that can make those modifications if you thought what was proposed was out of line with them. But I want to be really clear, the PUD does specifically accepts the maximum length in development area C. So what I just, and that was something that Amanda brought up at the very end. So sorry, I just want to be
Thank you
really
for
clear about
clarifying
that.
that. I appreciate that.
That's not what's in there.
Thank you. I want to make sure it's always helpful to understand what we're voting on.
All right, is there a motion?
I'd make a motion that we approve BAC 0000125-2022 and PUD 0000126-2022 as per staff and the planning commission's recommendation with the site plan and all that that's coming back to the planning commission be referenced finally back to the city council with a public meeting.
I have a motion, is there a second?
Second?
There's a motion and a second, roll call.
And I want to say I'm going to vote yes on this because I do feel that you all have been very mindful of everything that we've asked and that the Planning Commission has asked. And I know that community development is like listening to everything that we've said here. And because I know that also we could end up with, if we didn't have a PUD, we could end up with something totally different. So, and I live in this area. I live in Nottingham. So I think we can make this work.
Item 9B, consideration, discussion, and possible approval of SB 3110, 2022. Special use permit for short-term rental. Jill?
Thank you. This item before you is SP 310, 2022, and it's a request for specific use permit for a type 2 short-term rental located on property that's north of Washington Street and 1/3 mile west of Elm Place at 1204 West San Antonio Street. The property, like I mentioned, is zoned for R3 district, and type 2 short-term rentals, what's being requested, and that is allowed with a specific use permit if approved by city council. One guest room may be permitted for each 2,000 square feet of lot area with type 2 short-term rentals and up to a maximum of 4 guest rooms. This property does have 88,496 square feet of lot area and 3 guest rooms. So with the 3 guest rooms and the 4 parking spaces that are available on site, with the garage and 3 spaces in the driveway, it does meet those minimum requirements for the site. The applicant submitted information via email regarding how they plan to screen the potential short-term renters and monitor their activity while renting. The minimum age to book is 25, and that's verified through the Airbnb website that's used for the site. The property is equipped with a Ring doorbell camera on the front and the back, and no parties or events are allowed by the property owner. The applicant lives within 3.5 miles from the property. This case was reviewed by Planning Commission on December 1st, and 2 residents submitted online forms indicating opposition to the request without any additional comments, and 1 resident did submit comments on the form of a fiscal letter including that they are in opposition to the request. 3 residents submitted online forms stating they were in opposition to the request with additional comments, and 1 explained that their reasoning for opposing the request was due to the HOA's restrictive covenants prohibiting businesses on residential lots in the subdivision. Additionally, they were concerned about potential disorderly behavior and the possibility that short-term rental could be contributing to the shortage of affordable housing. The other 2 online comments in opposition cited concerns over safety related to guest vetting and unknown people coming and going and the effect on property values. During the meeting, Commissioner Townsend asked for clarification about the prohibition of a business on the lot by the HOA covenants, and Assistant City Attorney Graham Parker explained that it is immaterial to the discussion at hand, as such restrictions are private matters among property owners and not what the city can enforce. 1 resident spoke in opposition to the item in person during the meeting with concerns surrounding the homeowners association. So the applicant did explain and rebut afterwards and explain that the property values are not based on whether there is a short-term rental in the neighborhood, but rather based on past sales and the size of the homes. She also stated that she was never made aware of the existence of the HOA and the restrictions, and that she monitors all rental activity closely to protect her investments. She explained that she had long-term rentals in the past and they were heavily damaged by tenants, and that her experience with short-term rentals has been the opposite of that. So staff recommended that specific use permit be approved, subject to that it's only for the current property owner, and if ownership of the property changes, the specific use permit for the short-term rental would expire. And after reviewing the information presented in the staff report and by the applicant, the Planning Commission recommended approval 3-0 with 1 abstention from Commissioner Cohen for the specific use permit. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do we still have a committee looking at the long-term direction that we need to be looking at?
We do. We're actually very close to one of the first steps that we'll take is to put a notice in the newspaper before a public hearing will happen at Planning Commission. We're very close to putting that public notice out there. We hope to release the draft this month to the public for review and for also for council's review.
Doing a moratorium on these until we get a report of that committee?
That is an option that some cities have used. So that is an option available to city council to consider.
We're getting 1 to 2. It seems like we're getting 1 to 2 a quarter at least, perhaps more. And I know part of that is because we're enforcing them and it's generating that. But there are some neighborhoods that have 5 or 6 of these. And like my neighborhood is 100 homes. You have 3 or 4 of these. Suddenly I'm living next to hotels.
We could put this on the next agenda for council to discuss.
I'd like to have
Yeah,
a moratorium.
I'm the one that asked the questions about, which I've asked them every time we've done this, about having, like, I think that's something that the committee is looking at is like how many we can limit, how many are allowed within I don't even know if you can say a neighborhood, but within a certain distance, because otherwise your neighborhoods end up being little mini hotels.
Well, that's my concern. So I'd like to.
But then this might be something that would be good to bring up at our expo, like, because something that because like right now we don't have anything in our HOA covenants about it. And it's like I keep pushing, like we need to get this done. And, but people they're not watching city council meetings. They don't realize how many of these we're approving every other week. And so, but also, I want to seriously look into if we can require short-term rental, the people to do some sort of background checks for looking for sex offenders. At least it be a question that, they can lie about it, but at least it's a question, because that worries me. I think it's a way for sex offenders to enter into neighborhoods and watch schools and things like that. So
I would like to see a moratorium issue in line with that discussion on the next meeting, so we can address that until we get a report of the committee and can actually act on it.
Yes.
It's because, we've been hearing about this committee for a while, and I know they're doing the work. I'm not worried about that, but I think the longer it goes, the more these keep coming in.
Yes.
And we're trying to address that. So if we could put that on the next agenda.
Absolutely.
With regard to this, I don't know that I necessarily have a reason to deny it. Otherwise, HOA issues are privately enforced. Now, if this violates HOA, someone can sue to enforce that, but that's their business as far as what we're considering tonight.
Correct.
Is this. So I'd make a motion to approve.
The motion? Second. Roll call?
before I vote, do we tell them when they come, do we say, have you checked with your HOA to make sure that this is within your covenants before or do we make that suggestion to them?
That is not part of it's an online form now that's really user friendly, but that would be a great question to add in there.
Mhm.
Just
I
not
mean, I
that
know
we
we can't get in the
can
middle of
enforce it,
that, but
Maybe
at
they'd
least-
be saving a lawsuit from somewhere.
exactly.
yeah.
Maybe suggest, have you checked with your HOA?
Yes.
To make sure.
Before you press submit.
Yeah.
Mayor, before we move on, I'll just have ask Jill to work with Trevor to put the appropriate language together for council discussion at the next meeting, for you to possibly take some action, and then just ask Trevor if he has any parameters in terms of setting up a moratorium, that he'll have that information for you.
All right. Just stay right there, Jill.
I'll stay
Item
planted.
9C, consideration, discussion, and possible approval of SB 366, 2022. Another short-term rentals.
Yes, thank you. This specific use permit request is for a type 2 short-term rental on property that's located 1/8 mile north of Washington Street and 1/4 mile east of Garnett Road at 2002 South Cypress Avenue. The property is zoned R2, and type 2s are allowed if approved through a specific use permit by city council. And the same requirements apply that I mentioned on the previous case. This property has 9,030 square feet of lot area and four guest rooms. And with the 4 guest rooms and 5 parking spaces that are on this property, it does meet the requirements for accommodating the vehicles that would be associated with the number of guest rooms. This case was reviewed by the Planning Commission also on December 1st, and the applicant's representative spoke on their behalf regarding the request, and she stated that she owns an Airbnb cleaning company, and she will also be the 24/7 contact for the short-term rental. The property owner does not live in the area, so she's designated a 24/7 contact that is closer to the property. The short-term rental, there wasn't an official screening plan provided, but she did state that she is installing a Ring doorbell camera on the home, and that there's a screening process associated with Airbnb. 2 residents did submit online forms indicating they were in opposition to the request without any additional comments. 1 resident submitted the online form indicating they were undecided on the item without any additional comments. And 4 residents submitted online forms stating that they were in opposition and cited concerns regarding the effect on property values, noise, neighborhood quality of life, and safety of families and children in the neighborhood due to traffic and the vetting of guests. 3 residents submitted forms in person saying they were in opposition to the request but did not wish to speak. And 2 residents signed up to speak in opposition to the item and cited concerns over the safety of the children in the neighborhood, the incompatibility of the use of the property of the neighborhood, and the potential for a lack of maintenance of the property. And the applicant's representative provided a rebuttal saying that the applicant is family oriented and has children of their own. And she explained that there's a higher price point for rental at this property due to the size of the home, and that with experience with long-term rentals, it could lead to worse situations with the property as far as the upkeep and maintenance of the site. Staff recommended approval contingent upon that it would be only for the current property owner, and if ownership changes, the specific use permit would expire. And after reviewing this information in the staff report and by the applicant, the Planning Commission recommended approval 4-0 for this case. And just more recently, included in your packet, we did receive 2 letters Wednesday, December 28th, that were provided to the city clerk that are in the packet for your reference. 2 residents submitted letters in opposition. And we have also added in photos of the property because I know that there were concerns that were mentioned about the maintenance of the site. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
You know, it's different to think that there's gonna be problems rather than when you actually see one. So when they see a problem and turn it in, then they can lose their permit, the way it stands now. Is that correct?
That's correct. There are, the ordinance does allow for a license to be revoked. There is the annual license. And that's the part that could be revoked. On the specific use permit, it would just expire if the property owner changed hands, but the license to that individual could be revoked depending on the type of violation.
Viable complaints.
Right. That's correct.
How would they, do they do those on Action App or?
You can do it on Action App.
Okay.
We also have a hotline just for short-term rentals on the website too. And that came as part of the software that we use for tracking on the code enforcement side to locate sites and make sure that they're compliant with all the requirements.
We should put that info out, that we have that.
The
That should be
hotline?
on it, yeah.
You can work with communications to make sure that that's being pushed out.
One of the things on that letter that was submitted to us cited that the house is posted on Airbnb for 8 guests, and the planning commission approved the house to rent up to 6 individuals. But did you say it's a 4-bedroom?
It is a 4-bedroom, and the ordinance allows for up to 6 individuals that aren't related or 2 families. So the families part is where it doesn't become as obvious, because if they're related, it could be 2 families, and that could exceed 6 people. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, these days the average family has 2.5 kids, so I've never seen a half kid, but
Round up.
I'll make a motion to approve SP 000-366-2022.
Do you have a motion?
I'll say,
Second, roll call. All right, motion passes. Item 10A, preview ordinance, consideration, discussion, and possible preview of an ordinance revising chapter 16, article 1, section 1619 of the city of Broken Arrow Code of Ordinances governing begging and.
If I can, real quick, Mayor, just a quick history here for the public's knowledge. A couple of months ago, I spoke to a couple of members of the council, and I shared the concern about the fact that we needed to look at this. And Trevor has done some really good due diligence in looking at current laws, our code, in the city of Oklahoma City, and some situation they went through. And so I just want to thank him for putting everything together. But this is a concern that was brought to the attention of myself as well as several members of the council member. So that's why I want to make sure that we're being responsive to their concerns. And I think Trevor's going to do a really good job of explaining, what the council can do, what we can't do, hopefully dispel some of those misunderstandings about what the city can or cannot do. And hopefully this legislation, if the council approves it, would give our police officers some additional enforcement ability should there be a violation of the ordinance.
and it's drafted in a way that's consistent with the Supreme Court's most recent rulings in McGraw and others.
In my opinion, it is. And Mr. Spurgeon, thank you for that introduction. If I may, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council members, currently the way the city of Broken Arrow's peddling, or not peddling, but anti-panhandling ordinance is written is it basically says that you can't repeatedly beg in a manner that hinders or obstructs the free passage of any person in a public space. Surrounding communities have found that those type of restrictions hadn't been sufficient to address an increase in the panhandling, some of it of an aggressive nature in the various communities. So as Mr. Spurgeon explained, we did a little bit of a survey around the state of Oklahoma to see how other communities have been dealing with this. And we really landed on Oklahoma City. And one is specifically because of their legislative history and also the experience they had before the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. So back in 2005, they'd actually had adopted an ordinance that specifically, 2015, explicitly prohibited standing, sitting, or remaining on any public roads and medians. So that was in 2015. So they effectively banned panhandling from the public right-of-ways. Before they made that ban, they'd operated under a permitting system where if somebody wanted to make, ask for donations, whether it's for charitable donations or even just for themselves, they'd have to go through a permitting process, and that would be allowed. Almost immediately in 2015, Oklahoma City got sued. They got sued by several different groups. They included the ACLU, some newspaper groups, panhandlers that used the right-of-ways to get money, the Oklahoma Libertarian Party, and also multiple city residents that had I think there was one that had handed out news flyers. So they used it as a public forum. So when they got sued, the 10th Circuit, the district court basically said, look, whenever you're dealing with First Amendment rights, which begging is, it's a First Amendment free speech issue of asking for solicitation of funds, whether it's that for the individual person or if it's for a charitable group. The courts have said, look, if a city wants to restrict those types of rights or pass laws that affect those types of rights, they want to have very specific findings of the harms in those communities. They want to find that what has been designed by that community actually addresses those harms and that it's the least restrictive means that's necessary to address those harms, and that there's still alternative avenues of speech for the community. So what the courts did when Oklahoma City got sued is they said, well, let's look at what the harms have been stated by Oklahoma City. Let's look at what the prohibitions are, and let's see if there's alternative means for people to continue to ask, to beg. And so what the courts found was that there were specific complaints from citizens and also businesses about panhandling and the medians in the streets. But the court, when they reviewed that, they said that, well, if you look at the harms that were used to justify the ordinance, they found that there weren't any specific harms such as, increased number of accidents, folks backing up traffic, increased of crimes such as muggings, related to the begging that was taking place, things of that nature. And as a result, the court found that the ordinance was not narrowly tailored to address those legitimate concerns, and that they were less burdensome means to achieve that safety goals. And that finally, that the ordinance did not leave sufficient channels for the citizens to communicate. And so when the trial court made that ruling against the city of, against Oklahoma City, they decided to appeal that. And so the appeal went to federal court and the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And when the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals considered this case, they affirmed the findings of the trial court, meaning they said that, Oklahoma City's complete ban on all begging within the city's right of ways was not constitutional. It did not meet the requirements of the First Amendment. So based upon that ruling, the Supreme Court, Oklahoma City actually asked for review by the United States Supreme Court, who refused to accept it. So that means that left the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals decision affirming the trial court's decision, overturning Oklahoma City's ordinance. So I tell you all that to say a complete ban on not soliciting, but begging, asking for donations is not going to be, in my opinion, be found constitutional based upon what the 10th Circuit has said. And so what Oklahoma City did in light of that decision is they went back to the drawing board and they said, well, what are some of the specific concerns that we have in our community? What are some harms that we can articulate that we find locally, in our community? What are some lesser restrictive means that we can have that will address those concerns? And how can we do that in a way that still leaves folks the opportunity to exercise their First Amendment rights on traditional public forums, such as public mediums, streets, places like that? And so Oklahoma City had made some very robust and specific legislative findings. And I wanted to make a note that in looking at this issue, just for a point of starting off of conversations, I went ahead and included what Oklahoma City had found for their community. Now, keep in mind, we're not Oklahoma City. What we have here is going to be more specialized. It's going to be more specific. Obviously, the concerns that they have there and the facts on the ground are going to be different from the facts on the ground that we have here. But this at least gives us a starting point to start off with the conversation about, well, what are the things that we should be looking at in the areas of concern that we can look at? And so some of those things are just, general duties that the city has to protect people to exercise their First Amendment rights, that we're not looking to infringe upon folks' First Amendment rights. But at the same time, when people are asking our citizens for money or begging, that can give rise to, potential harms to our citizens, and that we want to make sure that we're addressing those in an appropriate fashion so that we can protect our citizens. So some of those things that Oklahoma City had found is that continuing begging or soliciting from a person after they've given a negative response, that can make that person vulnerable to being unduly influenced. Touching another person while they're being begged, again, that in and of itself could be considered an assault. Blocking or interfering with the safe passage. Again, that's why we have our public ways, so folks can move about their business and not get accosted, in a violent way. Violent threatening gestures that could provoke a violent response, from a citizen. Closely following behind someone can make them feel like, maybe they could potentially be the target of an attack. Profane, threatening language of someone who's just trying to go about their day. Begging and soliciting money from people in a captive location, such as you're waiting to enter a public building. Or maybe you're at the DMV in line and you can't give up. There's nowhere for you to go. You have to just stand there. Begging or soliciting in a manner that would cause a reasonable person to be in fear of imminent bodily danger. And they went on. But again, we would have to work with our police department to find out the nature of any specific concerns that we have for Broken Arrow because of our unique nature of our community. But again, this gives us a starting point. And so keeping in mind that these are the articulated harms that they had to their citizens, Oklahoma City then went about defining specific actions that they thought would protect folks from those types of harms. And what they did is they outlawed what they called aggressive begging. And so to put teeth to it, or to put a little bit of meat to the bones on it, they defined 15 specific behaviors that they outlawed. And you can see those in the ordinance, but in general, some of those behaviors are approaching or speaking to a person or following a person during or after soliciting. That conduct is intended or likely to cause a reasonable person to fear bodily harm. So it's not reasonable for a citizen to be put in fear, which is basically the definition of an assault. And so if someone is aggressively acting in a way that they've asked for funds in a way the citizen believes that they could be subject to an assault, you can't do that. If somebody has given repeated negative responses of no, I'm not going to give anything to you, and that the person continues to solicit them, that would be illegal. Touching or causing physical contact, again, you're talking about the definition of battery at that point. Blocking or interfering with the safe passage of a person. Violent or threatening language. Following a person. Speaking in a volume that's unreasonably loud under the circumstances. Soliciting money from anyone who's waiting in line for tickets, entry to a public building, or for any other purpose. Soliciting in a manner with conduct, words, or gestures intended or likely to cause a reasonable person to fear imminent bodily harm, danger, damage to, or loss of property. Or intimidating a person into giving them money. Ganging up on somebody in a group of folks, a group of 2 or more persons that are doing it in an intimidating fashion. And then there's the last one, soliciting a person within 20 feet of any outdoor seating area, a cafe, restaurant, or other business, begging and panhandling a person within 50 feet of any mass transportation stop, and then 50 feet of any locally owned public or private school used for elementary school age children, soliciting in the public after dark, which is 1/2 hour before sunset to 1/2 hour after sunset, and then soliciting or begging from somebody who is 16 years of age or younger. We did have some questions about that. There seemed to be some confusion. It's not a matter of the person asking for funds having a child with them. That would be allowed. Certainly the police could investigate if there's any child welfare issues, DHS type of complaints in that situation, but that's not what this would outlaw. It would be because they're a minor and they're subject to more undue influence, you can't go and solicit and beg from a child. So those are some of the specific behaviors that the Oklahoma City approach outlaws. And I thought it was a good starting point for this body to consider, especially because of their experience, the lawsuit that they had over essentially banning all begging and soliciting other public ways. And I thought that they took a thoughtful approach and really looked through what the areas of concern that the district court and the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals had identified. And so I think for this body, I think the challenge and the opportunity before us is to have specific findings of fact for our community based upon some input that I'd like to invite the police chief in a moment to come up and to talk about some of the specifics of the calls. We've gone back through the last 3 years for the numbers of the calls that have been increasing, the types of activities that we're seeing. And so I would encourage after we do that, that we would then, if it's this body's decision to go forward, we could set this for a final consideration with specific findings of fact that are more tailored to our community. But like I said, this at least gives us a good starting point. And thank you for indulging me on getting a little bit into the weeds on the lawsuit. But I think it helps give us a framework to realize what the boundaries are in this area. So with that, I'm happy to answer and take any questions before I turn it over to Chief Berryhill.
Yeah, I know we just had an increase here lately, and it's like whole families, and they're utilizing their children to go out to cars and to go up to people and solicit. So I know that was a huge concern. We were told that they were like a certain group of people who just kind of go from city to city and do this. And so maybe they've already moved on, but I know there was a 2 to 3 week period that I had nonstop calls and messages about why is all of a sudden we have this influx of panhandlers everywhere, and their whole families like on all the corners. And it was a little disturbing to see that just kind of almost invade the city.
And that's not addressed at all, like the age of the panhandler. Is that something we can address in the ordinance?
Safety issues.
Yeah. Like,
So that's a great question, Vice Mayor. I
Thank
think, no, it is. And I think what we have in place currently are our child welfare laws, the Department of Human services. And so if there's a welfare check to be done, we currently have robust systems to do that. I would be hesitant to recommend that we try to address it through a panhandling statute, because we do have those statutes in place currently. And then it also then, I don't really have a lot of good guidance from the courts on how they would view that or
Right.
would it be improperly restricting the child's First Amendment rights if they're holding out, a sign, I'm raising money for my Girl Scouts troops.
Well,
So you got to keep in mind that you have those type of issues.
that was my thought is it's sort of like if you have your child with you when you rob a bank. You have to worry about the fact that you robbed a bank, but you also have to worry about the fact that you endangered your child or contributed to their delinquency by allowing them to participate in the robbery of the bank. It's the same process. If you're doing something that's illegal, such as allowing your child to run into traffic and demand money, you're violating a different law that has nothing to do with panhandling, but has everything to do with child safety endangerment. So as the mayor said, it's a child safety issue, which a call to the police and or DHS would be appropriate in that instance.
But what they were doing, our ordinance there wouldn't be anything wrong with that.
Not in our ordinance, but there's other laws that
Yeah.
they might be breaking, such
They're
as
engaged.
child endangerment. And this ordinance would be overly broad to address that when there's other statutes that allow for it.
I don't know that that's true, but
Well, as a
like
lawyer,
if
I
you're
can tell you
if you're letting your child go to a car, you could say that they could just say they're walking across the street.
if you are directing your child to endanger him or herself, you are at risk of violating the law with regarding child
Well,
endangerment.
I agree with that. And I don't think you should send your child out to beg for you. Like, man up and do it yourself if you're going to do that. But that's my opinion. What questions I did have, which I did, you did answer, but I wanted to make sure and get it on the record. So item G, so it's about panhandling within 50 feet from any land owned by a public or private school and used in whole or in part for providing education services to elementary age children should not be allowed. But I don't understand why we wouldn't just say, why we have to put elementary age children, why it wouldn't be all public schools, public or private schools.
So that's a good question. I think in the effort to have it as narrowly and directly focused as possible, the legislative finding that minors under 16 are particularly vulnerable to being, coerced or improperly influenced, it goes to reason that the folks that are going to be in the elementary schools are going to be under the 16 years of age.
Or middle schools, though.
And that's possible. And again, like I said, when we do the more specific findings of fact, that's something that we could certainly explore to say, do we have an issue with panhandlers, beggars going, near, high schools, get some information about, are high schoolers, more or less susceptible to, being defrauded or improperly influenced by somebody asking them for funds.
Well, okay, so what is a minor in Oklahoma? What's considered a minor? 17?
Well, the age of consent for, I think, cigarettes now, did they raise that to 21 recently? Obviously, to drink alcohol is 21, to vote is 18.
Okay.
They
I
can
don't know
emancipate as a
emancipation
minor,
of-
Charge
17
as
and
an
under.
adult.
You can emancipate.
The age of emancipation without
Is-
a court finding emancipation is 18.
Is
It's
18.
just determined to be
So-
the age of majority.
Here's the thing. It's not my job to decide if a minor, it's not my job to decide if it's undue influence or improper. That's the parent's job. So until they're 18, they're a minor. And so I feel like we should be providing protection. And whether or not, this is, we feel like we are providing a protection for everyone. And I feel like until you are an adult, until you reach that age of consent, we shouldn't limit it to 16-year-olds or elementary age children. It should be, if you are a minor, these things should not be allowed.
No, and we can council can certainly, consider that. And that's the opportunity that we have going forward to customize this for the city of Broken Arrow. And my recommendation would just to make a robust finding on that, make sure that, we do the best that we can to support those findings. And that would certainly give us the opportunity to do that.
If there's an analysis that says based on the police and other research that says that children generally under 18 are at risk of being unduly influenced for this purpose, then I think we could support that. And I wouldn't be opposed to it if we can support it.
Well, if the law states that you're a minor until you're 18, then isn't that,
But
don't we have to follow the law?
yes, but the issue is not that. That's a separate issue. The issue is, are there, the statute or the ordinance that is being drafted has to be able to support, you may be under the 18, you're a minor, but if that's not a problem we're seeing, we have to be able to justify the ordinance, the language of the ordinance to address specific problems in our community. That's what I understood. And I read the ruling, so I think that's consistent with the ruling. So if we don't have that problem, we can't do a blanket ordinance addressing a problem we don't have, which is why we need the police to analyze whether it's a problem or not.
Well, do we have a problem with panhandling at the schools right now?
I would have to defer to the police chief on the specifics of the calls.
I mean, I've never seen that. So, I mean, that's what I'm saying is if we're not really addressing a specific issue. We're like saying, we're coming up with, these are the things we feel like we can defend most. But I mean, if you all don't want to do that, I mean, I feel like if you're a minor, that we should be protecting them within this ordinance. That's my opinion.
And that's a very good point. And again, to keep in mind, these are the findings that Oklahoma City made about their community. And I wanted to give this body an opportunity to have some talking points of similar type things that we could discuss, make sure that we customize it to our community. And there might be specific things that we need to add, or there's specific things we might want to delete. But I think it's important that we make it fit our community.
Yeah.
But again, we need a place to start to talk about it.
The other thing, I mean, just because someone acts like they're begging, they could be, and I feel like I'm like on this like sex offender thing tangent right now, but because there's so much trafficking going on, but they could be acting like they're begging, and they could be, I mean, it gives them, if they're at a middle school or the high school, it gives them like, well, we can't do anything. They're begging, and they could be like soliciting, and who knows what they're talking to them about once they have access to a minor. So I don't want people to have access to minors in our city for any reason.
So Trevor, could the council change that to be no minors can?
Absolutely. None of this is written in stone at all. This is just for your consideration to start the conversation. We certainly wanted to get council's feedback. We certainly wanted the police department to have opportunity to talk about the facts on the ground in Broken Arrow. So all of these things are certainly subject to change in your direction.
I agree with the Vice Mayor. I just think that wholeheartedly, I just think that the case law says it has to be addressing a specific issue in our community. And that's so the question that she raises is a good one we need to be looking into. Can this address a specific problem our community is facing?
And that might be something the police chief could speak to.
And I feel like minors are being targeted right now for various reasons, and this could be an avenue for targeting a minor. So then we can review all this, get you back our ideas, and then compile and discuss further. Okay, my question, like, this is a preview ordinance. Can we pass this and still change it? Or like if we pass the preview ordinance, we can't change anything like when the ordinance comes
We
out?
certainly can change it. Vice Mayor, our practice typically would be to preview the ordinance and set it for adoption.
Mhm.
And in between that time, we can certainly take input. Either if you want to have a special working meeting, I'm not suggesting you do, but that would be one mechanism, or you can certainly email me with suggestions. I'm happy to meet with anyone.
The whole purpose of the ordinance being set for preview is to allow us to have this very discussion.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
we preview it, set it for adoption, but the final ordinance may not look entirely like
Okay, it
this.
doesn't have to be exactly
No,
what we
no,
preview.
no, not-
Okay.
not at
I think
all.
I don't know if it is normally, but, okay.
There may be something that council comes up with that Trevor says we can't do that right now. We need to research it, and I wouldn't hold up the rest of the ordinance, because then you could come back and you could amend it again.
No, I agree.
We can always amend an ordinance. I mean, even if we can adopt it one week and amend it the next meeting, as long as we follow the proper procedure to do so.
Yes, sir.
Do you want to have Chief come up and speak?
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you, Trevor.
thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, Mr. Spurgeon, Chief Burial, the Police Department. I was asked to give some context on this particular issue. So the avenue in which we have to do this is through our computer dispatch system. So when calls come into the police department, we log those. We have a narrative. So there is some caveats to that. So the numbers that we have, it is rising. So what we've seen for 2022 is that there were 71 calls received. In 2021, 53, and in 2020, 28 calls. Now, that being said, the way we do a search in computer dispatch system is we do a search through a word. It goes, looks at the narrative, it enters into the search of how it was entered in by the dispatcher. So we're looking for panhandling, begging, and things like that of that nature. That being said, if an issue was a trespassing issue, let's say you owned a business, someone's begging on your business and you say, I want them to leave. You call the police and say, hey, I want this person trespassed. And we get there and the person's gone and no one ever says the word panhandling or begging, that word's never going to be entered into CAT. So there is some limitations on the search that we can do. So these numbers are provided by the computer dispatch system in the 911 center. Calls for tonight's discussion were obtained for this last year, particular year, as far as the specifics. January 1, 2022 through December 31st, 2022. These calls were entered in by the 911 dispatcher or a caller or by an officer relaying information via the radio. Dispositions and narratives on each call are updated from the information given by the caller and our officers on the scene. So those calls can also change. It could be a trespassing, and if they say begging or panhandling during the narrative entry on the end, that'll be a searchable item. 71 calls were received that contained reference words of begging or panhandling in 2022 for the city. For example, I discussed the trespassing issue. So that's a caveat. We do receive trespassing calls all the time. Many of those are not panhandling or begging, but that's just one of the limitations I wanted to make sure that you're aware of. Of the 71 calls, 66 of those calls are probably not going to be a violation under our current ordinance and may or may not be a violation under the proposed ordinance just by nature of what they were doing. If they're not obstructing someone, they come up and ask. If they don't repeatedly ask, if they're not coming aggressive or profanity. So many of the calls that I have when I'm reading the narrative are probably not going to be a violation of either the current ordinance or the proposed ordinance. Of 5 calls within that 71, the caller said the person was aggressive. Now, we don't know in what manner they were aggressive or they just were, their opinion, they were aggressive. Aggressive is not defined in these calls, only by the word aggressive being stated by the caller. 3 of those calls, the person that was conducting begging or panhandling left before the officers arrived. 2 of those were trespassed by the businesses after the officers arrived. All but 1 of those 5 were at businesses. Out of the 5, only 1 was at an intersection that contained the word aggressive in the narrative. And the aggressive part of that was the reporting party said the person would not get away from the window until he told that person to leave. And then they left. Well, that's not really aggressive. They left after they were told to leave. Out of the 71 calls, I went through and looked at those. 35 were at intersections. So when you typically think of a panhandler or someone begging at these intersections, so out of the 71 calls for 2022, 35 of those were intersections. The other majority, the other remaining, all of them were at businesses, Quick Trips, Walmarts, businesses like that. In that case, the business has the option of trespassing, whether they're there to beg or they're there to loiter. And in many cases, they walk out and say, hey, I need you to move on, and they leave. And so sometimes we have a trespassing issue.
On the intersections, do we have it broken down, like how many was on the median and then how many was just on the side of the road?
I have just the intersections here. I can tell you if it's at Lynn Lane and the highway, it's going to be on the off-ramp. The particular situation you were talking about the family, and I haven't seen a case where any of these people begging that we have run a history check on were homeless. Those people had a hotel. They were just asking for money so they can go from town to town to town. And we had a lot of calls in November, end of October, and those decreased. So a lot of these calls are from the same incident.
Well, because in that time period, literally by my house, I could go 3 miles and at every mile intersection, there were families. That's when we got so many. I mean,
Yeah.
they weren't even busy intersections. It was like Olive and 81st and Olive and 91st and, you know, strange.
So in November, that particular family, there was one citation issued, but it was not written under ordinance 16, which is begging or panhandling. It was written actually under ordinance 23, which is traffic. And it was written by a traffic officer. So I don't have the ticket in front of me. So I'm surmising that this person walked out the roadway as traffic was moving, hindering traffic. And therefore this officer wrote the person a citation for hindering traffic. So it's not under begging, it's under just walking out the street, blocking traffic.
Right.
So
There's always more than one way to skin the cat.
well, so anyway, and so in 2021, we had 53 of these calls. In 2020, we had 28. So we are seeing an uprise. Now, whether or not that's indicative of our surrounding areas, I don't know. As we become a larger and larger city, those numbers are probably going to continue to rise. Yes, and when we go out to some of these calls, in fact, that one family, we would get like 10 calls a day. It got to the point to where the watch committee made a decision to go out, check on the kids. If there's no DHS issues, they got clothes, they got food, they got water, and there's no one with warrants to arrest them, we're not going to continue to go out and harass these people. Because if they're not breaking the law, we're not going to go out there 10 times for the same incident, the same people. Because we've been out there, we've checked on it, and we can't afford to keep sending officers out there 10, 15 times a day. So a lot of the calls that you're going to see in here in that time period was probably the same family, which are no longer here. So I only did the specifics for this last year. I didn't go back and delve into the previous years, but you're probably going to see something very similar. Normally when I have seen people begging or panhandling, it's in major thoroughfares. A lot of times these businesses don't allow it. So a lot of times they take care of the issue and don't even call us. I don't have any knowledge of any panhandling or begging around schools. It's really around major intersections is what I'm saying, and people coming and going from convenience stores.
So Walmart, Quick Trip, they can still call the police and ask, and the police will come.
Yeah. So even if they're not begging or panhandling, if they're just loitering, it's private property. Okay. So you're allowed to exercise your free speech in an area where that's what's just called quasi-public or quasi-private. If the public has free access to come and go as they wish, someone can go into the parking lot of a business and beg. Okay. The act of begging is not the illegal part.
Yeah.
If the business does not want them on their own property doing an activity that's hindering their business, they can have them moved for trespassing. So they would say, please leave. You're not going to leave. They would call us. We'd say, hey, I want you to leave. I'm not leaving. Okay, here's a ticket. You know, we would go that route. So it's a trespassing issue. So it's bifurcated.
Yeah.
So it's either a begging issue or it's a trespassing issue. But most of our businesses in town understand that customers don't want to be accosted coming and going, and they normally take care of the problem. And many times they take care of it.
Me to my car one day, like just constant, and I was just like, dude, no, and I finally got into my Jeep where my gun was, but I was like, it made me.
You should keep your gun on your person and not leave it in your car.
I know, you're right. I should. Noted.
Do we have public?
It's not right now, though.
Is this often accompanied by public drunkenness issue as well? Or?
And many times it's not, because if you're intoxicated in public and you're quiet, we're probably not going to know you're intoxicated. But if you're intoxicated in public and you're loud, you're probably going to go to jail. So in many cases, these people are their goal is to get money, not to get arrested.
Well, on that note, it's saying that, it's punishable by a fine. That's what we're looking at. But how would we get that? I would assume we're not going to be able to.
It'd be if they don't come, it'd be a failure to appear. A warrant be issued for the arrest by the judge as a bench warrant. If we pick them up, they would sit in our jail, and I think they get $7 a day, maybe, for sitting in our jail where we're feeding them and paying for their welfare.
Maybe they wouldn't come back though.
I don't know.
If they a lot of times, yeah.
If there was a warrant,
We have a pretty nice jail.
I know.
That's true.
They have pretty good food.
Very good food.
Well, what constituents have been reaching out to me, which I'm sure you all have heard the rest, is when they go to a Quick Trip,
Yeah.
they're there. And that's where I like the juvenile part, because kids go into Quick Trip. I mean, and not sometimes not with their parents,
Mhm.
And I'm just really concerned that if we don't let the officers have some teeth to this, we're going to be a Tulsa. No offense, Tulsa, but we don't want to be a Tulsa. And when we did see it, even though the officers went out 10 times, apparently that was enough to make these people move on. And that's the message I would like for our city to give is we're a loving city. If you are truly in need of help and you need resources, I know our officers will give them resources. We mission John 3:16, they'll come and pick them up and take them wherever, downtown and get them the help they need or whatever. But most of the time, these people don't want help and they do irritate our citizens. And that's where I feel like it's our responsibility to protect your responsibility to protect our citizens from those aggressive people. And what's aggressive to me may be different than what's aggressive to Christy, just completely different. And I know a lot of people were concerned about those families that were here because they did have children. And we did talk to our congressman, Mayor Wimpy and they said they were part of a cartel. And so part of that money that they beg from our citizens go to fund the cartel. And we just don't want that in our city. We just don't want that. And I want, as a council, to be able to give our officers enough teeth to make that statement that not in our town, I guess.
There's probably three different categories. You've got the people that are panhandling as part of a scam. They're just doing it because that's what they're doing. You've got those people, and we're not going to name names or say who they are, but there's 4 or 5 people that we all kind of know who they are. And we think they're homeless. They're not homeless because our officers know who they are. They have places to live, but that's how they're supplementing or sustaining Social Security, whatever they got. And then you got the other category where you may have someone that's either truly homeless or destitute, economically disadvantaged, which is here very low. But they're going to go wherever people are handing out money. And officers do have a whole list of services, and we offer those. Many times people don't want to use the services we can give them. So there's probably, it's not all one shade. There's several different categories to this.
There's mental health issues that go with the truly destitute.
Many people that we experience that we believe may be homeless do have some mental health issues.
I do know too, a few of the constituents that reached out to me said that they quit calling the police because you all couldn't, you would go out to see them, but there was only so much you could do. So they quit calling the police in 2022. So those numbers could be higher, but people just quit calling when they, because they'd say, I called the police.
That was the questions I was getting. Why aren't we doing something about this?
I think
We don't want to see this in our city.
I think it's a
the
lot
point, the
higher.
problem is, and this is the thing I heard the chief say, neither the current ordinance we have nor this ordinance would necessarily address any of the problems that were being raised by it. So, this is a lovely discussion. I'm not sure this ordinance really helps us get there.
Yeah, I don't know how the word gets out, but I know that when Tulsa was talking about passing an ordinance where you had to have a safety vest on, some of the people over here were wearing safety vests.
Yes.
And so the people that are doing this understand
Communicate.
where that line is, and we're not to go over that line. And they understand, if we go out and check somebody, we're going to run them for warrants. If they have no warrants and they're not accosting someone and they're not running out in traffic as it's moving, it's covered under free speech.
And maybe our citizens need to be educated on, hand them this is where you can get help, and stop giving them money, and then they'll stop standing on those certain street corners. Because if they're not making a living, they're not gonna, and that's like you said, we want to help people who truly need help. Our churches, our community in general is very generous. And so we want them to get proper, get the information they need, but it's not going to change their standard of living, me giving them a $5 bill right then. But 100 people giving them a $5 bill will. And that's the problem.
But maybe if this ordinance isn't going to do what we'd like for it to do, then that's where the chief and Trevor could get together and say, these are the issues that our officers are seeing. How can we make a better ordinance to give the officers? Because I'm sure the officers are just as frustrated as our citizens are when they go out there and they can't really do anything about it. But then the citizens are like, the police didn't do anything. Well, they do something. They go out there, they make a contact. But then if there's nothing else that can be done, they're at a loss. So then our citizens are mad at our officers who's trying to do their job, but we're not giving them the need to be able to do that, the teeth.
Yeah, I think the businesses themselves actually do a pretty good job of maintaining what's going on around it, because for them, they have a vested interest in people coming and going without getting accosted. So,
Yeah.
and we have something on the books for that already, which is trespassing.
Yeah.
But it's the intersection issue that's probably the bigger problem. Happy to answer any other questions if you have.
Make a motion to set the ordinance for, to preview the ordinance and set it for adoption.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Johnny's having a snack.
We're voting.
Time to
Did you
vote.
push my button?
No.
Nope.
I
No.
like to do that.
So it's popcorn time.
I was listening.
All right. Thank you, Trevor and Chief. All right. Where are we? Ordinance 11A, consideration discussion on possible adoption of ordinance number 3766, zoning ordinance. Jill,
Thank you, Mayor. These 4 items that are together under the ordinance section should be very brief. They do both include rezoning cases that were approved on previous agendas by City Council, and they have met the requirement for platting the property. And so these are the ordinances that would be officially changing the zoning map after that's been satisfied. So 11A is for rezoning case BAZ 2095, which is a 9.8 acre site. And it was approved for rezoning from A1 to RS3 on November 2nd, 2021. And it was approved contingent upon the property being platted. It was platted as Highland Park in Wagner County on December 13th, 2022. And staff recommends approval of this ordinance to officially change the zoning map and approve the subsequent emergency clause.
Any discussion?
Make a motion to adopt ordinance number 3766.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call. Item 11B is consideration discussion of approval of emergency.
Make a motion. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call. Item 11C, consideration discussion of possible adoption of ordinance number 3768.
So this item relates to zoning case BAZ 2104, which includes rezoning the property from A1 to ON, CG, and IL and PUD 336, which contains 7.53 acre site and was approved by the City Council on February 15th, 2022. So the approval was contingent upon the property being platted, and a portion of the property has been platted, not the entire site, but 1.02 acres has been platted. It's as 51 West 1 on November 29th, 2022. That plat was filed with the county. And with that, staff recommends approval of the zoning map change through this ordinance for the portion of the property that's being platted and the approval of the emergency clause.
Any discussion?
Move to adopt ordinance number 3768.
Second. Oh, Scott has seconded it. Just kidding.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call. 11D is the emergency clause.
Make a motion to approve the emergency clause.
Second. Christie.
Motion and a
Second.
Roll call.
I'll just be the narrator.
She interprets for me.
Yes.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call. All right. Item 12, remarks and inquiries by governing body members. Keep them brief.
Yeah, well, I was made aware of a sad thing that happened over the New Year's weekend. As our city grows and ages, some of its founding members and longtime servants sometimes pass away. And one of those was the family and the patriarch of the family who gave us the land that we now have as the events park. And that was, I'm sorry,
Anderson?
Yeah, Mr. Anderson passed away. He was, notably, he was a past member of the Broken Arrow Public Schools, a member of the founding chairman of the Broken Arrow Community Foundation, a member of the Uplift Trees Board, a member of First National Bank and Trust of Broken Arrow Board. He was the Broken Arrow Citizen of the Year and donated his personal home and family home to the city of VA for the BA Events Park. Mr. Anderson's contributions to our city have a long storied history, and I was sad to hear his passing and hope that the family of Andy Anderson know our appreciation for their contribution and share
Very
our
generous.
condolences.
That's a lot of land, and the house was is nice.
Family, I
Yeah.
hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Down a couple of days.
Well, I was made aware of it, and I thought it was worth mentioning, considering the level of contributions he's made to our community over the
Yeah,
last many years. That's the sad part of a community that was founded and helped be grown by so many. As they age, they pass, and we honor them and celebrate their contributions by what we do here tonight.
Did you get that picture?
I think I did, yes.
So speaking of the events park, this is cool. I'll wait till he pulls up the picture.
Need some help?
Maybe.
Wow, it went like it. So this
Aw.
is Cooper Franklin, and this is him catching his first trout at the events park.
That is a big fish.
I know.
That's huge.
So I just think this is the coolest thing that we're doing, and I love it that people are out. Who knew? I mean, fishermen, they are, and fisherwomen. I use men like for all, whatever. They will get out. I mean, I have family that fish in the cold and this. I mean, it doesn't matter what the weather is; they will be out there fishing. So I love this. So,
Well.
but he's not behind a keyboard or playing a game. He's out fishing.
I think that's a legacy Mr. Anderson would appreciate.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was perfect. So, very cool.
Anyone else? City manager remarks?
Just two things real quick, Mayor and members of council. Good evening. Great discussions this evening. February 14th is an important day. It's not only Valentine's Day, but it's also the vote for the franchise renewal for PSO. And I met with Tiffany Jackson, their Senior Vice President of External Operations today, and they should begin their public education campaign very soon. And their communications director will be working with Aaron to coordinate what we can do in terms of providing information. So that will be happening. And then secondly is that Kim Crenshaw is going to be providing the senior center board with the recommendations that were approved by the city council at the last meeting. And I'm sure that when she does that, they'll discuss them at upcoming meeting. And then I'll be scheduling a series of meetings with her as well as member of the administration to begin implementation. I just want everybody to be aware of that. And I'm sure that with the fact that Councilman Parks is on there and then Vice Mayor basically know what's going on, you'll be able to answer any questions that they may have. So I'm excited about that. Then next step will be, in the interim, will be to extend the contract, get that taken care of, to give us time to implement those recommendations, which will take time. And I'll update the council once I get an implementation plan together in terms of what we're going to do. But the plan is, just to be clear, is those employees at some point this year will become city employees. And so I just want to make sure that, council, if anybody asks a question, my intention is to bring those folks on board, work with HR, get job descriptions and so forth. But there's just a lot of logistics we need to work out. That's all I have.
All right. So we do not have an executive session, so I'll take a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
The motion and second, roll call. Call the Broken Arrow Municipal Authority meeting to order, roll call.
Ford.
Here.
Hootie.
Here.
Parks.
Here.
Gillespie.
Here.
Wimpy.
Are there any items to be removed from the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
The motion and second, roll call. There are no public hearings, appeals, presentation, recognitions, or awards. No general authority business. Remarks from governing body members? City manager?
No, ma'am.
All right. There is no executive session.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
The motion is second, roll call. Call the Broken Arrow Economic Development Authority meeting to order. Roll call.
Ford,
Here.
Udi,
Here.
Parks, Gillespie,
Here.
Wimpy.
Here, are there any items to be removed from the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
We have a motion and a second, roll call.
I didn't get the motion in the second.
Scott and Johnny was second.
Okay, there we go.
We hit the buttons again, just for you.
Thank you.
You don't have
We fight for you too. There are no presentations, there are no general authority business, remarks from governing body members. City manager? None.
None.
We also have no executive session here.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and a second, roll call.
We learned this system, we got it down.
All right.
I'm gonna do it online. I thought about going, but I can do it online now, which I didn't know. They never, I asked them last time and they never sent it to me. And then, so I thought I couldn't, and then I found that I could. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Sir, I don't care what they say.
No, I'm not. What?